Chapter 86, Hunting for Poisonous Scorpions. Although Jian Chen had killed quite a few Class 2 magical beasts in Kargath Academy before, the ones in the Magical Beast Mountain Range were on a completely different level. The Class 2 magical beasts in Kargath Academy were not even equivalent to some of the Class 1 magical beasts in this mountain range. Moreover, the magical beast that he had encountered was one indigenous to the Magical Beast Mountain Range. Just as Jian Chen was distracted, the poisonous scorpion didn't give him any time to relax, as its 6 powerful legs began to scamper across the floor. In a blink of an eye it covered dozens of meters and arrived in front of Jian Chen as its poisonous green pincers widened menacingly and pincered towards Jian Chen's head. Encountering a local magical beast for the first time in the mountain range, Jian Chen did not dare to be negligent. He had learned the hard way in his previous life that being careless only led to disaster. Jian Chen's expression immediately grew solemn. He tilted his head, dodging the giant scorpion's pincers by a hair's breadth. He then gathered strength in his feet and pushed off the ground, leaving a deep footprint in the ground as his body burst forwards towards the poisonous scorpion's much smaller head. The light wind sword in his hand was once again enshrouded in that hazy white light as Jian Chen aimed it straight at the scorpion's tiny eyes. The eyes, throat and heart were 3 of the most fatal and weakest parts of the body. That much Jian Chen understood, but this poisonous scorpion had a neck that could not easily be pierced due to the angle. Not only was the neck rather short, but it had scales that were interwoven with each other to protect it. Under this circumstance where it was impossible to determine how tough the scales protecting its neck were, Jian Chen had decided to attack its eyes. Although Jian Chen was very confident in his precise and powerful stab, the defenses of some magical beasts were also just as tough. Thus, he wasn't 100% sure that he would be able to penetrate the scales and deal a serious injury to the beast. Jian Chen's sword traveled towards the scorpion with blinding speed. His sword had already reached the scorpion's eye. Just as the sword chi-enhanced light wind sword as he was about to pierce the scorpion's eye, it suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a pungent green blob of poison. Almost as if it were being controlled by a mysterious force, it flew quickly towards Jian Chen. At the same time, the scorpion's eye shut and the head dodged towards the side, avoiding the light wind sword. The light wind sword's speed was matchless, and so even at this crucial moment where the scorpion desperately tried to dodge, the scorpion wasn't able to completely avoid the sword. In the end, the sword slashed open the scorpion's outer eyelid. While the light wind sword hit the scorpion's outer eyelid and it paused for a bit as it encountered resistance. After a moment, the amazing amount of sword chi around the sword caused it to break through the strong defenses of the eyelid and stab through into the eye of the scorpion successfully. Simultaneously, Jian Chen's entire body was covered by the green fog of poison. Hiss! As it felt the sharp pain in its eye, the scorpion let loose a hoarse scream. A dark green fluid began to leak out of the injury in its eye, and its great mouth opened wide, revealing rows of needle-sharp teeth. Its overall appearance was extremely terrifying. The poisonous mist floated around. Jian Chen, who was shrouded inside the fog, retreated outwards, in a sorry state, as fast as lightning to escape. Right now, Jian Chen's appearance was the complete opposite of his previous state. His whole body was covered with a layer of dark green poison. His coarse clothing had begun to disintegrate at an alarming rate, and even his originally short hair had begun to fall off as green threads. Feeling a painful burning sensation throughout his body, Jian Chen's face hardened before growling, "What a strong poison." Quickly, Jian Chen grabbed onto the melting clothes before tearing them off from his body while using his saint force to counter the poison that made contact with his skin. Jian Chen looked at the one-eyed scorpion that was still crying out in pain. He knew in his heart that this was the perfect time to kill the scorpion. With a flash of killing intent, he dashed towards it without even stopping to take out a spare change of clothes from within his space ring, making him completely naked while moving to finish off the scorpion. Jian Chen's movements were agile and nimble, and he quickly flashed to the poisonous scorpion's side. With a shake of his arm, he reached out as fast as lightning, moving the light wind sword in his hand so fast it appeared to be just a ray of silver light. It shot towards the scorpion's throat, and in that instant, the blade suddenly exploded with sharp sword chi. Although it didn't seem to be very powerful, that sword chi was similar to a sharp blade. Like a streak of lightning that briefly illuminated the world with a gorgeous and magnificent light, and it immediately disappeared without a trace momentarily afterwards. Ding! Jian Chen's light wine sword accurately struck the poisonous scorpion's throat. When the blade came into contact with the dense scales covering the scorpion's throat, a clear sound similar to metal striking metal rang out. However, the scale's defense was quite strong. It was only able to withstand the light wind sword for an instant before the blade sharpened with sword chi broke through, and pierced deeply into the throat. See! The poisonous scorpion once again cried out miserably. The single, intact eye pulsed with a strange, dark green glint as its thick pincers quickly jabbed forcefully outwards towards Jian Chen. The 5 to 6 meter long poisonous hook behind it blurred as it flew over Jian Chen's head and tried to pierce the back of Jian Chen's head. Jian Chen pulled out the light wind sword buried in the scorpion's throat. His feet pushed off the ground, and his body sailed through the air as he jumped onto the scorpion's wide back. Hiss! Hiss! The poisonous scorpion was evidently extremely annoyed by the fact that Jian Chen had jumped onto its back. It began to violently shake its body, wailing unpleasantly as it recklessly waved its giant pincers around in the air. Based on the scorpion's current state, it appeared that the injury on its throat that Jian Chen had just inflicted didn't harm it that much. Seeing that the scorpion was still as ferocious as it was before, Jian Chen frowned. He couldn't help but mutter, its ability to stay alive is really too great, to think that it still hasn't died. Because the scorpion's body was so massive, Jian Chen once again realized how limited his strength was. Aside from attacking the two vital regions of its eyes and throat, he couldn't find any other way to harm this scorpion. At that moment, Jian Chen heard a faint ripping sound. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen flashed horizontally to the side. Just as Jian Chen dodged to the side, the shining dark green poisonous hook flew over his head, and then ruthlessly pierced the scorpion's own back. A soft sound could be heard as the strong, plated section of its outer shell was pierced through by its own sharp poisonous hook. Under its own sharp poisonous hook, its shell did not offer a whit of resistance, and was easily pierced through. The sharp hook buried itself deeply into the scorpion's own body, and dark green blood began to flow out from the wound. Seeing this scene, Jian Chen's expression clearly went blank. However, immediately afterwards, he couldn't help but feel unsure of whether to laugh or cry. He had really never imagined that the poisonous scorpion would be stupid enough to actually hurt itself. The scorpion tugged at its poisonous hook. But because it was already deeply buried within its body, its movements instantly pulled out a chunk of flesh as well. The scorpion felt such intense pain that it ceaselessly wailed in pain as its entire body shook. That fierce pain was enough to disperse any further thoughts about pulling the hook out. Whenever a human or creature receives a serious injury, there will be a cushion of time where the strength that they exhibit, as well as their reaction speed, will be at its worst. Jian Chen saw this, and grasping the perfect timing, his body flew high up into the air as he jumped off the scorpion's back. The light wind sword in his hand flashed with a silver light, and pierced towards the scorpion's other eye. Because the scorpion was feeling fierce pain from its back, its reaction time had greatly slowed down compared to its normal reaction speed. In addition, Jian Chen's blade's every movement was incomparably fast. In the scorpion's current state, it was extremely difficult to evade or withstand Jian Chen's lightning-fast sword. The light wind sword accurately penetrated the poisonous scorpion's other eye without resistance. Jian Chen showed a pleased expression. He exerted more strength into his hand, forcing the light sword even deeper into the scorpion's eyes. Eventually, after thrusting at least half of the 4/3 meter long blade into the scorpion's eyes, he finally managed to injure its brain. This time, the poisonous scorpion no longer struggled or made any move to resist. Its entire body shuddered a few times before it fell like jello to the ground. With a loud bang, its enormous 1-meter-tall body fell to the ground. Jian Chen slowly pulled out his light wind sword. His brows knit together at the sight of the scorpion's bright green blood and white fluid covering his treasured sword. With a single thought, the green and white fluids covering his sword slid off the blade, and it instantly returned to its original appearance. Jian Chen's gaze circled around the poisonous scorpion corpse for a bit, then raised his light-wind sword to pierce through the skull. However, the light-wind sword had just gone through the outer shell of the head before getting blocked. Even though the poisonous scorpion was already dead, its outer shell's defense was still just as strong as before. There was no way Jian Chen could break through its defense with a casual wave of his sword. This snake's skin is really thick. Jian Chen furrowed his brows, and sighed, forget it, I might as well conserve my energy. The magical beasts here come and go randomly. If I preserve my extra strength, then that is an extra layer of protection for my life. I'll just retrieve this monster cores by going through its eyes. Saying this, Jian Chen resumed his actions. After great effort, he was finally able to retrieve the monster core stored within the scorpion's skull. Chapter 87, Surviving in the Mountain Range. Looking at the thumb-sized monster core, Jian Chen couldn't help but smile. It really was a Class 2 monster core. Look at the purity of the energy inside. Not only that, this Class 2 monster core is much better than the ones I found at Kargath Academy. It really is true that the magical beasts in the Magical Beast Mountain Range are stronger than the ones in the Kargath forests. After collecting the monster core, Jian Chen lowered his head to look at his body that was now dark shade of green. However, his body wasn't injured at all. Since he had been refining his body since he was young with the special techniques from Azulite Sword Law, his physique was really strong. So even though the poison caused his body to feel some pain, it couldn't get past his skin and enter his body. The majority of the damage was being counteracted with his inner saint force. So while his entire body was tainted with a green poison, the only symptom he felt was a slight burning sensation. Jian Chen looked around himself and listened attentively. There probably isn't a water source here, so I won't be able to wash this off. I guess I'll have to handle this roughly. Plucking a few tree leaves, he began to wipe off the excess venom while pulling out a new change of clothing from within his space belt. Although this place was extremely large and there wasn't anyone around, Jian Chen had no hobby of walking around naked. After changing his clothes, Jian Chen walked away from where the carcass of the scorpion lay without a care at all for it. Although magical beasts had many important parts that could be harvested and sold off for a high price, this scorpion was just a Class 2 magical beast. If he were to sell this, he wouldn't be getting much since it wasn't a precious type of material. Plus, Jian Chen had plenty of purple coins to spare, so him today did not care for such a little sum of money. While the beasts that were born and grew in the mountain range of magical beasts were much more powerful than those in Kargath Forest, they were much rarer than the ones in Kargath Forest. After all, while the mountain range of magical beasts may not be the largest in the Tian Yuan continent, it was still vast in its own right. The magical beasts in the mountain range were all scattered about, so meeting a magical beast was not impossible, but rather quite rare. For the entire day Jian Chen slowly walked deeper into the mountain range. By nighttime, he had only seen 2 magical beasts, excluding the previous Class 2 poisonous scorpion. These 2 were both Class 1 magical beasts. The moon was hanging high up in the sky and basked the earth with its lunar glow. However, it did not reach into the forest where darkness reigned supreme, so one couldn't even see their fingers if they stretched out their hand in front of their faces. With the abundant amount of leaves covering the forest, the weak lunar lights wouldn't be able to penetrate through onto the ground below. Meanwhile, on a flat piece of ground, a large bonfire burst into life and lit up the night with its dancing flames. Jian Chen knelt by the bonfire with a stick in his hand as he slowly cooked a piece of meat that was speared through. Slowly, the meat began to caramelize as the fat began to slowly drip off onto the fire below, sputtering it out. After eating his fill, Jian Chen pulled out a unique-smelling herb from his space ring and sprinkled it on the surroundings. This herb was one of the few things that every mercenary entering the forest would need to prepare. Before resting, if one were to sprinkle this herb in his surroundings, it would be able to repel the majority of poisonous creatures from disturbing him. Of course, this medicine was only useful towards normal animals, and had no effect on magical beasts. After using the herb, Jian Chen immediately leapt onto a nearby tree. Sitting cross-legged on a slightly flatter branch, Jian Chen took out another faintly sweet-smelling herb from within his space ring and started to sprinkle it on his body. This white-colored herb was very effective in suppressing one's qi, preventing his qi from escaping, which might attract any kind of wild beasts while he was sleeping at night. After all, both the wild animals and the magical beasts in this mountain range had extremely acute senses of smell. Although this powder wouldn't be able to completely hide Jian Chen's qi, it could at least conceal it from the senses of normal animals. The mountain range had many magical beasts as well as wild animals. The reason why wild animals were called so was because they had no monster core within their bodies. Wild animals were also not as strong as a Class 1 magical beast, similar to humans that hadn't yet manifested their saint weapons. Although the wild animals weren't strong and anyone who dared to enter the mountain range of mystical beasts could easily kill them, when it came to cultivating or sleeping at night, no one would want to be bothered by a wild animal. Therefore, practically every mercenary who entered the mountain range or slept outdoors overnight would be prepared, and bring a good amount of this type of herb. After the safety preparations were complete, Jian Chen took out a big handful of monster cores and distributed them between his two hands. Jian Chen slowly closed his eyes and began to absorb the energy from the monster cores. The energy from the monster cores started to flow out at an extremely terrifying speed towards Jian Chen, before funneling into his body via his pores and nostrils crazily. This absorption rate naturally placed a slight burden on Jian Chen, causing his pores to feel a slight ache from expanding. Throughout his entire body, there was no area that did not hurt. Although it was aching a little, this was not enough for Jian Chen, who had a strong willpower, to mind it much. The energy of the monster cores had a berserk element to it. If it weren't for Jian Chen using the world essence to strengthen his body since he was young, which meant that his internal organs and his fundamentals were made to be a lot stronger than most others, he would have been heavily injured alone by the berserk element contained within the energy of the cores, never mind the fact that he was absorbing the energy into his body so crazily. Following the absorption of the large amount of energy, the berserk element accumulated inside Jian Chen's body. When the berserk element reached a certain point, a large absorption power started to surge from Jian Chen's dantian, pulling these elements continuously towards the dantian, before finally being absorbed by the two glows of azure and violet. On Tianyuan continent, if a practitioner wanted to rely on the monster cores to cultivate, then they would need to clear away the berserk element within the energy and absorb the pure energy remaining. Just removing that element from the energy would take a lot of time, and even then, the berserk element wouldn't be completely removed, and would leave behind some harmful effects within the body. So while there were many people who relied on using monster cores to cultivate, not many would continue down that path. Every so often, a person would need to stop using monster cores and completely refine the energy absorbed, in order to not suffer from any negative effects. Though with Jian Chen, he could absorb and refine the energy from the monster core without fear of the consequences, which was possibly due to the glows within his dantian. The moment the energy entered his body, the berserk element would immediately be absorbed by them, allowing for Jian Chen to absorb the energy from the monster cores without fear. This was why Jian Chen had such a large advantage over the other cultivators. Following the steady absorption of the monster cores, Jian Chen could clearly feel the saint force slowly growing larger and larger in his dantian. Although it might look slow to the naked eye, Jian Chen understood that this speed compared to others was really fast. At this rate, it would not be long until he would break through to become a great saint. On the second day, when the sunlight passed through the small chinks between the dense tree leaves, Jian Chen, who was sitting cross-legged and cultivating, slowly opened his eyes. He then flipped in the air, jumping down from the tree, and smoothly landed on the ground below. Jian Chen stretched his body for a bit. After consciously feeling his inner saint force, he couldn't help but smile. He could clearly sense that his current saint force was much more powerful than when he had first condensed his saint weapon. Based on his calculations, his current strength was most likely already at the level of a middle saint. Although he was only a middle saint, it had been less than a month since Jian Chen had first condensed his saint weapon and broken through to sainthood. If anyone else heard that Jian Chen had managed to become a middle saint only less than a month after, they would definitely find it hard to believe. After eating some food to fill his stomach, Jian Chen once again continued on his journey. Time quickly passed by. In the blink of an eye, a month had already passed. At the foot of the Magical Beast mountain range, a youth wearing a coarse set of clothing was currently facing a pitch-black, panther-type magical beast that was 1 meter tall and 3 meters long. The youth held a long, thin, silver sword. He stood tall and straight, seeming to be as immovable as a mountain. His face was brightly colored by mud and dust, making it impossible to make out any of his facial features. The panther-type magical beast was glaring at the youth opposite of it with a ferocious glint in its eyes. It roared deeply, and began to fall into a crouching position. Its hind legs firmly planted into the ground, preparing to attack at any moment. Chapter 88, Great Saint Ho. Suddenly, the loud growl of the panther-like magical beast was heard. It leapt into the air with such force that its paw print was visibly imprinted on the ground, as its entirely black body transformed into a black shadow that shot towards the youth 10 meters away. While in midair, the black panther began to open its large jaw that revealed its sharp teeth that could fill a person's heart with dread. The youth smiled coldly as the silver-white sword within his hand started to emit a faint white glow. With a single slash, the sword tip flew towards the black panther's opened mouth. The sword was traveling extremely fast, just like a flash of lightning. However, the black panther's reaction was very fast, so when the sword reached its jaws, the black panther tilted its head to the side, barely dodging the incoming attack. However, the sword was still traveling too fast to be evaded completely, so it grazed its head. It left a very noticeable wound on the black panther's shaggy head. However, the black panther's speed did not slow down at all. Maintaining its previous speed, it shot towards the youth in front of it. The corners of the youth's mouth tilted upwards, as if revealing a mocking expression. His eyes radiated a flash of killing intent. Hoisting the sword in his right hand, he immediately stabbed towards the black panther once more. This speed was faster than before, almost bordering the inconceivable. The black panther wasn't able to dodge the sword this time, and so the sword speared through its throat before it could even react. Due to the panther's momentum, the sword in its throat penetrated even more deeply. The sword only stopped after it was completely buried in the panther's throat up to its hilt. The other side of the sword was already covered in blood as it pierced through the back of the panther's neck. Blood started to drip from the inclined sword onto the back of the black panther. The youth slowly pulled out his sword from the black panther. Afterwards, the blood on the sword strangely started to gather at the tip of the sword, and drip onto the ground. In the blink of an eye, the originally bloody sword had regained its original bright luster. On the hilt of the sword were 2 words, Light Wind. This youth was Jian Chen, who was adventuring around the mountain range of magical beasts alone. Unknowingly, he had already stayed in the mountain range of magical beasts for a month. This whole month, Jian Chen had remained in the outskirts of the mountain range, not going deeper in or farther out. During this month, Jian Chen would explore the outskirts of the mountain range during the day, and cultivate during the night. During this period of time, he had focused primarily on improving his strength, unlike back in Changyang Mansion where he had to slow down his cultivation speed so that his performance wouldn't be too outstanding. Because of that, Jian Chen's strength had practically skyrocketed in the course of a month. He had already broken through from a peak saint to become a great saint. In this short month, Jian Chen went from a primary saint to a great saint. If this speed was to be found out by the public, then it would send a huge shockwave throughout the continent. This was because for any regular person, it would take 2 or 3 years to go from a primary saint to a great saint. Even geniuses would need around a year, so Jian Chen's frightening speed was unheard of. Unbeknownst to everyone else, he had already set a new record in the history of Tian Yuan continent. But this would be a piece of history that would be buried deep, never to be heard about by anyone. Since he had broken through to the Great Saint level, Jian Chen's fighting strength had skyrocketed as well. The current him could easily hunt down a Class 2 magical beasts, and he had already set his sights on Class 3 magical beasts. The light wind sword dissected the Black Panther, before a bloodstained but white monster core came bouncing out, which was caught by Jian Chen. Jian Chen casually used a handful of grass to wipe the bloody monster core clean, even though he himself could care less about the amount of blood on it. Looking at the single core in his hand, Jian Chen smiled and murmured to himself, "My luck today is not that bad, I've collected 12 Class 2 monster cores already." After grabbing the core, Jian Chen didn't pay any further mind to the Black Panther's corpse and left the area. Jian Chen carefully trekked inside the mountain range. He was now a great saint, so it could be said that he was a lot stronger than before. However, he was in the mountain range of magical beasts, so he didn't dare to be careless. He knew clearly that while his position was currently in the outskirts of the mountain range, he would still be able to encounter some stronger magical beasts that came from the deeper parts of the mountain range, ones that Jian Chen currently wouldn't be able to handle. It could even be said that the current Jian Chen was very vigilant. Carefully looking around constantly, he had to be extra careful, especially with the hidden swamps since they were very hard to detect. From far away, the flatlands and swamps couldn't really be differentiated. But the moment one walked over a swamp, they would be devoured by it, and wouldn't be able to escape without another person's help. Right at this moment, Jian Chen's ear twitched. He began to shout with a great big smile, "Water, I can hear the sounds of water. There's water around here." Jian Chen immediately headed towards the direction of the water with great speed. Not too long after, Jian Chen passed through some tall weeds and finally reached a small stream. This creek was only 3 meters wide and wasn't too deep. Yet the water was so clear that the stones on the bottom of the river could be clearly seen. Seeing this river, Jian Chen smiled with joy. This was the first time he had come across a water source since entering the mountain range of magical beasts. And after all the time he had spent here, the clean water he had in his space belt was almost all gone. If he hadn't found a water source soon, he had considered leaving the forest. Looking around the place, he inspected it to ensure it was safe, before pulling out a few canteens from within his space belt before kneeling down to fill them with water. After a few more canteens were filled, Jian Chen threw off his clothes and jumped into the stream to wash away the sweat he had built up on his body. Not even a few seconds after Jian Chen started to bathe, his face suddenly changed expression from a relaxed one to a battle-ready expression in an instant. Immediately leaping up into the air from the water, he materialized his light wind sword into his right hand, and stabbed downwards with it. Chapter 89, Silver-Striped Golden Snake. Just as Jian Chen stabbed downwards with his light wind sword, a golden vine-like thing flew out of the water and attacked Jian Chen. When Jian Chen's sword and the golden vine-like thing collided into each other, Jian Chen's downward momentum was stopped. His whole body maintained a stabbing posture while he was suspended in midair. The tip of his sword accurately pierced the head of the golden vine-like creature. This scene lasted for a span of 2 breaths. Suddenly, from the forest next to the river, another golden vine suddenly burst out from the tall grass and flew at Jian Chen. Jian Chen's face didn't change from the sudden ambush. Bracing his arm as he prepared to borrow the power of the golden vine-like thing below him to gain momentum, he kicked off of his attacker and whirled through the air, landing firmly down by the riverside. The moment he hit the ground, he immediately sprinted to where his clothes were and put them on. After putting on his clothes, Jian Chen looked up to assess the golden vine-like thing only to find out that it was a golden snake. Its entire body was golden in color, but there were a few silver lines going from the top of its head to its tail. It was also long in length, just the exposed area alone was almost 6 meters long. The moment Jian Chen noticed the silver streak on its body, he was stunned. It seemed like he had remembered something, as his face suddenly changed dramatically. He couldn't help but exclaim loudly, "Silver-striped golden snake." The silver-striped golden snake was something that Jian Chen had read about before from the books in the Academy's library. It was a rare magical beast that was regarded as the Emperor of Serpents. In the entire Tianyuan continent, considering the tens of thousands of magical beasts, the population size of silver-striped golden snakes barely even reached 3 digits. The silver-striped golden snake wasn't precious because of its rarity, but because of its body. Whether it was for meat or blood, it was very valuable. The venom in its body was especially precious. It belonged to the type of goods in the Tianyuan continent where there was no market, even if people offered high prices for them. This was because if this highly toxic venom was specially refined, it could even kill a peak heaven saint master. Moreover, purging this venom was impossible. Unless one had the blood of the silver-striped golden snake, there was no other method. Even a radiant saint master wouldn't be able to do anything about it. Although the light saint force had mystical healing effects, and could detoxify many poisons, it simply couldn't remove the unique and highly toxic venom that a silver-striped golden snake possessed, as well as several other rather special types of venom. At most, a radiant saint master would only be able to temporarily suppress the poison, however, completely purging it was impossible. Also, the silver-striped golden snake was different compared to any other snake. Not only was it long, it was also relatively thin. It could be said that a few silver-striped golden snakes that reached the Class 5 magical beast rank would reach up to 100 meters long, but their widths would not even be 30 centimeters wide. A Class 6 silver-striped golden snake was able to control the size of its body, and could even shrink its body down to 1 or 2 meters long. Not only were Class 6 silver-striped golden snakes very strong, but rumors said that they could fly through the air and burrow into the ground. Its venom was unrivaled, and even a heaven saint master would be afraid of the consequences of being infected by one. In the ancient records, 100 years ago in the Holy Empire, a Class 6 silver-striped golden snake had laid waste to a king's city with the population of 10 million people in the time it took for a candle wick to burn out. Every single person was killed by the potent venom, even decayed corpses. All that was left in the city was the stench of fresh blood that rose endlessly into the air. After this horrifying event, the Holy Empire sent out over 10 heaven saint masters to go kill the silver-striped golden snake. But before half a day was over, 7 of the heaven saint masters were killed by the poison, with the remaining few having serious injuries or were poisoned heavily. However, not long afterwards, the remaining few experts that were poisoned died as well. This event had caused every single saint ruler in the Holy Empire to become shocked. In the end, a saint ruler finally fought the silver-striped golden snake in an earth-shattering battle that had only led in the withdrawal of the beast instead of killing it. But in the end, everyone knew how strong a silver-striped golden snake could become. Recalling the information he had read about this beast back in Kargath Library, Jian Chen looked at the golden-colored snake with a horrified look of disbelief. His heart couldn't help but begin to race rapidly. He didn't think that he would come across the rare silver-striped golden snake in such a desolate place like the mountain range of magical beasts. It was only the outskirts of the mountain range, where it should have been hard to even encounter one on the entire Tianyuan continent. Sweeping his eyes over the wrist-sized snake attentively, Jian Chen had to concede to the fact that he had come across a silver-striped golden snake. What terrible luck! How could I come across such a thing? Jian Chen quickly calmed himself, but inwardly, he was still cursing to himself. He knew how terrifying a silver-striped golden snake could be despite never seeing one in real life. Just reading about it was enough for Jian Chen to understand that with his current great saint strength, fighting against a silver-striped golden snake was extremely troublesome. Jian Chen heavily stared at the silver-striped golden snake only 10 meters away from him, his gaze filled with vigilance. He gripped his sword tightly as he thought about the fact that the silver-striped golden snake he encountered was no ordinary magical beast. A single mistake could possibly cause him to lose his life today. This was definitely the most dangerous encounter that Jian Chen had experienced since he had first entered the mountain range of magical beasts. It was to the point where he was unsure if he would be able to leave the place alive. If it was any other strong magical beast that Jian Chen couldn't defeat, he would still be able to run away. But the moment he recognized the silver-striped golden snake, he had already given up all such notions. He was fast. Even if he just relied on his saint's strength, he could surpass the speed of a wind attribute practitioner. However, Jian Chen was sure that his speed was incomparable to the snake's. He wouldn't even be qualified to carry the shoes for the snake if it owned any. That was because the silver-striped golden snake was extremely fast while running in a straight line. Although it wasn't the fastest magical beast, when it came to the ones that crawled on the ground, the silver-striped golden snake was in the top 3. When compared to humanity, unless you had the wind attribute and were multiple ranks higher than the snake, then you wouldn't be fast enough to outrun it. When seeing a silver-striped golden snake, one cannot run away in a straight line, or else a dead end will be the only thing that'll greet them. I don't know how strong this snake is either. If it is a Class 1 magical beast, then the danger will be significantly smaller, and I might be able to kill it. If it's a Class 2 magical beast, then there will be a bigger threat to my life, but I should be able to run away from it with no problem. Jian Chen muttered. Right now, his only wish was for the snake to not be too strong, otherwise, he didn't think he would be able to leave this place alive. As Jian Chen was pondering to himself in that brief moment, the silver-striped golden snake suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a gray poisonous mist that quickly floated over to where Jian Chen stood. As it floated over, every single plant life in the mist immediately began to wilt, and even the larger trees were noticeably changing. In a flash, it looked as if its very life was being drained away quickly. The moment the gray gas drew closer, Jian Chen's head started to feel a little dizzy. At the same time, Jian Chen felt as if his strength was being sucked right out of him. Feeling the change that was happening in his body, Jian Chen's eyes widened in shock. He realized the silver-striped golden snake could directly contaminate the air with its poison. Now he finally knew how terrifying the poison was. It was no wonder that the poison could easily kill a Heaven Saint Master. Without hesitating, he bit down onto his tongue with his teeth. The piercing pain from his tongue finally cleared away the dizziness he was feeling. After that, he jumped further back, and began to circulate his saint force around him so that the strength-draining sensation was weakened. Once again calming himself down, Jian Chen narrowed his eyes in concentration. Although he hadn't fought the silver-striped golden snake yet and only experienced its poison, Jian Chen could deduce that this snake was at the very least a Class 2 magical beast. Seeing the poisonous fog float closer, Jian Chen didn't hesitate before immediately holding his breath. His legs glided across the floor as he ran further away from the poison. The moment Jian Chen began to move, so did the snake. Turning into a golden streak of light, it flew towards Jian Chen at a speed multiple times faster than him. Although the silver-striped golden snake was only the size of his wrist in width, it was still very fast. In the blink of an eye, it had already caught up to where Jian Chen was, with its mouth wide open, ready to bite his neck. Right as the silver-striped golden snake was about to bite into Jian Chen's neck, Jian Chen tilted his head in this crucial moment and retreated backwards. At the same time, his light wind sword flickered into view in his right hand. With a single swing, a silver light came trailing behind the blade, slashing at the snake. With a large amount of sword chi concentrated together, the sword trail left behind looked like the lunar moon, and left a dazzling effect. Jian Chen had used his entire strength in that one swing. The light wind sword met no obstructions as it smoothly stabbed towards the silver-striped golden snake. But there was no excitement on Jian Chen's face. In fact, his face had started to look quite unsightly, as his sword didn't pierce through the scaly skin of the snake. Not a single mark could be seen on the scales. What a strong defense! Jian Chen gasped, his face deathly pale. Because of his cultivation methods, his attacking power was extraordinarily strong. Although he only had the power of a great saint, his attack was not much weaker than a saint master's. But an attack with his entire strength hadn't left even a single trace on the silver-striped golden snake. By this point, Jian Chen was aware that this silver-striped golden snake was at the very least a Class 3 magical beast, maybe a Class 4 magical beast. This was not a fight Jian Chen could afford to have. If it were an ordinary Class 3 magical beast, Jian Chen would have to expend a little more energy to kill it, but the silver-striped snake couldn't be evaluated the same way as a normal magical beast could. Chapter 90, The Magical Power of the Soul Sword. While Jian Chen was dazed, the silver-striped golden snake's unproportionately small head compared to its non-matching large mouth had turned and nipped at Jian Chen's neck once more. Brandishing its sharp fangs, a continuous stream of gray-colored poisonous mist flowed out from its mouth. Sensing the wide-open jaws of the snake biting towards him, Jian Chen immediately tilted his head to the side to dodge the gaping maw of the beast. Immediately after, his furious footsteps moved him around to the back of the silver-striped golden snake. Jian Chen's light wind sword shined brightly as he swung it down onto the snake's body once more, refusing to believe that it would be ineffective. The light wind sword accurately stabbed against the skin of the silver-striped golden snake, but only stopped at the very first layer of the snake's scale, unable to penetrate any further. The thin golden skin was as like an impenetrable fort, no marks would remain on it even from a full-powered blow of Jian Chen. Seeing this, Jian Chen's face became even more grim. His mood, after discovering how ineffective his sword was, had completely dropped. The silver-striped golden snake's powerful defenses had left Jian Chen with no options, as his strongest attacks against the powerful defense of the snake were like a child's scratches, wouldn't cause any harm. Jian Chen didn't hesitate at all. Immediately recalling his sword, he gathered strength in both legs to jump off the ground. Before the snake could react, his body was already high up in the air. After getting his bearings, he borrowed the power of the tree branches and flew towards the abyss of the mountain range of magical beasts. The silver-striped golden snake's strong defense wasn't something Jian Chen could handle. All Jian Chen could do was run away into the depths of the mountain range in hopes that another strong magical beast would somehow attract the silver-striped golden snake's attention. This was the only way Jian Chen would be able to escape. Although this method would be braving huge danger, there was no other choice. Jian Chen knew that there were many mercenaries within the mountain range of magical beasts that he might be able to draw support from to help stall the silver-striped golden snake. However, the mountain range was simply too vast, and the chances of meeting up with another mercenary was quite slim. Jian Chen flew into the air, using the tree branches on either side of him to catapult himself into the direction of the mountain range. Right behind him was the silver-striped golden snake that was in close pursuit, its tongue continuously flickering up and down. The upright part of its body was 6 to 7 meters long. The snake was fairly long, and its body dimensions weren't scaled completely yet. At that moment Jian Chen hadn't seen the features of the snake completely. However, he could estimate that judging from what he had seen from the silver-striped golden snake so far, it was at the very least 50 meters long. Jian Chen continued to run in an S-shaped trajectory while looking for obstacles in hopes that the silver-striped golden snake would be blocked. Roar! Suddenly, the roar of a tiger could be heard nearby. The sound of its arrival quickly headed towards Jian Chen's direction, and soon after, Jian Chen saw a 3-meter-long black tiger appear within his line of sight. The tiger's eyes glinted with an ominous feeling as it looked at Jian Chen, but just as it was about to pounce at him, a golden vine-like body 50 meters long appeared before it. The moment it saw the golden snake, it was as if the black tiger had received an electrical shock. All of the fur on its body flew straight up as the ominous glint in its eye withered away to nothing in an instant. Fear replaced the ominous glint as it looked at the snake. Not daring to stay any longer, the black tiger quickly ran away with its tail between its legs. Although the silver-striped golden snake was a serpent, if put in a crowd of magical beasts, most magical beasts would not dare try to bother it. This type of situation had happened in the mountain range many times before. Jian Chen had come across many different types of magical beasts, but this was the first time he saw one retreat so fast after seeing the silver-striped golden snake. This black tiger had practically pissed itself without a sound, as it gloomily began to run away. There wasn't a single magical beast here that would dare provoke the silver-striped golden snake behind him. An hour later, Jian Chen was already close to the abyss of the mountain range of magical beasts. The forest was growing more and more lush, causing Jian Chen to encounter more obstacles in his way. Right behind him, the silver-striped golden snake was chasing him relentlessly. It was as if the snake had determined that Jian Chen was its prey. Despite coming across a vast amount of magical beasts, its gaze continued to remain locked onto Jian Chen. Hiss! The snake's head disappeared with a blur as it nipped at Jian Chen once more. Jian Chen was constantly keeping track of the situation behind him, and so the moment he saw the snake move towards him, his legs pushed off of the sturdy tree branch he was on. The sudden force propelled him to the side, causing the snake to miss. Over and over again, Jian Chen continued to dodge the snake's attacks. The silver-striped golden snake grew angrier with each failure, as the dangerous glint in its eyes intensified. Suddenly, a long, golden snake tail quickly flew out from the tall grass toward Jian Chen. Jian Chen's expression changed as he noticed the tail come at him. Noticing the sturdy tree branch to his side, he immediately jumped and kicked away from his spot without hesitation. His entire body was then sent flying forward towards a large tree with dense, leafy branches. The tail of the snake immediately changed its angle and shot at Jian Chen with breakneck speeds. It caught up to Jian Chen in an instant, and began to wind around his waist tightly. As the tail wound around his waist, Jian Chen's face turned pale with fright. The light wind sword began to glow brightly, immediately slashing down at the tail. But because the outer scales were extremely tough, Jian Chen's sword left no marks at all. At that moment, a stinky stench wafted on over as the silver-striped golden snake's mouth, which was even larger than its body, could be seen. In a flash, it flew towards Jian Chen's neck, and was about to clamp down on it. Without any time to prepare himself, Jian Chen immediately thrust his light wind sword at the snake's mouth in alarm. But the snake was cunning, and it twisted its head to dodge the sword. Afterwards, the snake opened its jaws wide and sunk its sharp fangs deeply into Jian Chen's left shoulder. Feeling the intense pain in his left shoulder, Jian Chen's face drained of blood. The venom of the silver-striped golden snake was very strong, and once bitten, the only antidote was the lifeblood of the snake. There was no other method, even a radiant saint master wouldn't be able to cure it. But the scales of the silver-striped golden snake were far too strong for Jian Chen's current strength to even leave a mark on, let alone bypass them to acquire blood. Seeing the snake tightly biting down on his shoulder, Jian Chen grew even more panicked by the second, and his expression became crazed. Influenced by this state of mind, Jian Chen's soul became unprecedentedly active, as a hazy picture of the scenery around him came into view in his mind. Although this feeling was very faint, if Jian Chen was not sensing it intentionally, he wouldn't be able to feel anything. However, as his emotions currently were very agitated, he did not notice this fact. Ah! Jian Chen bellowed into the sky. Without even caring if he could break through the snake's defenses or not, he brought the light wind sword up into the air before swinging the sword back down, in hopes of beheading it. The moment the light wind sword came down, it was as if Jian Chen's spirit connected with the sword in his hand. It was like the two had completely merged into one, without any distinction. The union was so smooth that it brought up an indescribable feeling within his heart, as if his sword was his spirit and his spirit was his sword. At the same time, the azure and violet glows within his dantian began to flicker, as a weak light ray started to spread throughout his body from these 2 points of light. While Jian Chen himself was unaware of this, the rays had already started to spread from his head. Shing! The sword in Jian Chen's hand emitted a loud sound as a formidable amount of sword qi completely enveloped the sword. This time, the sword qi looked as if a dense fog had covered the sword. The blade within was indistinct, making it hard to see. Ding! The light wind sword viciously smashed into the head of the silver-striped golden snake. A light noise rang out. This time, the strong sword qi had allowed the sword to cut through the first layer of the super-strong defensive snake scales. Immediately, a deep-looking wound appeared on top of the snake's head, and fresh blood began to flow profusely from the wound. Hiss! The silver-striped golden snake hissed out in pain. Its bite on Jian Chen's shoulder was loosened, and it slithered away from him. Its eyes were closely locked onto Jian Chen, as it flicked its forked tongue out repeatedly. Seeing the bloody wound on the snake's head, Jian Chen was momentarily stunned. But soon afterwards, a joyous expression formed on his face. So it seems the spirit sword can break through the silver-striped golden snake's defenses. Jian Chen cheered inwardly. Under his deliberate control, the sword and his spirit had joined together so that the sword became the spirit and the spirit became the sword. This type of miraculous fusion that Jian Chen had clearly felt made him feel as if this sword was his life, his soul. As Jian Chen's connection between the sword and his spirit deepened, the violent sword qi around his light wind sword grew even sharper. It was as if this large amount of sword qi was completely controlled by his spirit. Not too experienced with such a mysterious sensation, Jian Chen loosened his hold on the light wind sword. The sword that was completely enveloped with sword qi didn't drop to the ground, but instead hung queerly in midair. It slowly ascended, finally stopping around Jian Chen's nose level a meter away from him. The tip of the sword directly pointed at the silver-striped golden snake. Xing! A clear, drawn-out sword cry was heard from within the light wind sword. Chapter 91, Slashing and Killing highlight above for the title. The silver-striped golden snake cautiously stared at the floating light wind sword with its forked tongue flickering in and out of its mouth. The incredibly strong and sharp sword qi gave off a dangerous air around it that the silver-striped golden snake could easily feel, which made it not dare to attack carelessly. Jian Chen slowly closed his eyes as he continued to carefully experience the mysterious sensation born from his spirit controlling the sword. Following this, his intention changed, and the light wind sword became a silver streak of lightning and flew towards the snake without anyone moving it, at an unbelievably fast speed. Whoosh! As the sword traveled through the air towards the head of the silver-striped golden snake, it emitted an ear-piercing shriek. Before the silver-striped golden snake could even react, the light wind sword had already pierced deep into its brain. Immediately, a deep wound appeared on its head as fresh blood began to flow out from it, dyeing the head of the snake a bloody red. Even though Jian Chen was still bound up by the snake's tail in midair, seeing the wound he inflicted on the snake made him very happy. Since he could break apart the first layer of the snake's defenses, this meant that Jian Chen had a chance of beheading and killing the snake. Jian Chen once again used his spirit-controlled sword technique to continuously attack the snake. Whoosh! The light wind sword under Jian Chen's control appeared to be a silver-white flash of lightning as it stabbed towards the silver-striped golden snake repeatedly. However, the direction he was attacking toward was now the body of the snake. Following the silver streak of light that flashed into the body of the silver-striped golden snake, another deep bloody wound appeared. Although the wound wasn't a light one, it clearly hadn't damaged the vital regions of the snake. The snake's heart was located 7 inches away from its head. Although this attack had broken the snake's skin right above its heart, its defense provided such a powerful resistance that the light wind sword couldn't harm the heart at all. Feeling the layer of skin where its heart was being attacked, the snake became more frantic. In a rush, the snake began to coil its body around itself so that it could protect the spot that was just attacked. At the same time, the tail that wound around Jian Chen's body had loosened and released him. No longer constrained by the snake, Jian Chen dropped down to the ground. Just after he landed, a strong wave of nausea surged through Jian Chen's head, but it was quickly suppressed by Jian Chen's spirit. Using his right hand as a support, Jian Chen crawled up from the ground with some difficulty. He glanced at his left arm, which he had completely lost all feeling. Sensing that his whole body had become really weak, Jian Chen's expression changed. With a sudden burst of power in his right arm, he ripped apart his own clothes, and saw that the entire section of his body starting from the end of his right arm all the way to the left half of his chest was pitch black. The color was also visibly spreading throughout his entire body. What a strong venom! Jian Chen's face sank. Only a span of a few breaths' time had passed since he had first been bitten by the snake, but within this short period, the poison had already spread to half of his body. Such a pace of progression caused Jian Chen to feel terrified. Moreover, the most frightening part was that his Saint Force was unable to suppress the spread of the venom. Remembering that the light Saint Force was able to help suppress the venom, Jian Chen didn't hesitate at all. While using his light wind sword to fight off the silver-striped golden snake and prevent any further attacks towards himself, he began to rapidly gather the light Saint Force from within the world essence toward himself. Under Jian Chen's control, the light Saint Force began to gather where Jian Chen was with extreme speed. Upon reaching a certain concentration, a hazy white glow appeared around his surroundings and was growing stronger very quickly. In the span of a few breaths, that previously hazy layer of white glow had completely changed into a strong milky white radiance, enshrouding Jian Chen within it. It was as if he was wrapped within a white cocoon, and while the glow radiating from it was strong, it did not hurt the eyes. Within the cocoon, the light Saint Force began to enter Jian Chen's body as a steady stream. The quickly reacting poison had finally met with an obstruction, and it began to slow down tremendously. However, that was the only effect. Although the light Saint Force could bring about a miraculous healing effect and heal many of the world's strongest snake venoms easily, it was not so for the silver-striped golden snake's poison. The light Saint Force could only bring about a temporary repressive effect. On the other side of the cocoon, the light wind sword changed into a silver radiance that spiraled around the snake endlessly, leaving a silvery white circle in the air. Trapped within the spiral, the silver-striped golden snake stared vigilantly at the light while protecting the injured part of its body, without exposing it at all. Even the snake had realized by now that its life was being significantly threatened. Whoosh! The light wind sword swirled around the snake with an ear-piercing sound. In a split second, the sword stabbed at the snake's head. Under the control of Jian Chen's spirit, the light wind sword was simply too fast, multiple times faster than if Jian Chen were to personally swing it. Before the snake could even react, the sword had pierced its head once again. Hiss! Feeling a sharp pain, the silver-striped golden snake began to hiss in pain while its forked tongue flicked about. Finally, it opened its mouth wide, and a thick gray fog of snake venom began to float out. The fog quickly spread out to the rest of the environment. In a flash, the plant life began to wilt rapidly. Even the nearby trees that had very strong vitality couldn't resist this venom. They withered as the previously lush leaves became orange, falling down to the ground slowly, as if it was autumn. As the poisonous fog permeated the air of the surrounding area and dissipated into the surroundings, the previously verdant and lush trees began to wither and wilt as they came into contact with the fog. When the poisonous fog had first appeared, Jian Chen had immediately held his breath, as the milky white cocoon rapidly dissipated. Even with the light Saint Force, the extremely dangerous snake venom could not be cured, so Jian Chen was very afraid of this fog. Borrowing the cover of its poisonous fog, the silver-striped golden snake began to move. It immediately slithered backwards to escape. The infamous snake that had spread fear with its name alone was feeling dread in its heart from the speed of the light wind sword, as the snake couldn't follow the blade's movements. In a life-threatening situation like this one, the silver-striped golden snake had given up on chasing Jian Chen. Seeing the snake trying to run away, Jian Chen became anxious. Without hesitation, he commanded the light wind sword to chase after it at the fastest speed possible. Since he was poisoned by the venom from earlier, he definitely needed the blood of the silver-striped golden snake to cure himself. Otherwise, even if he were to use the light Saint Force to suppress the spread of the venom, he would still die in the end. This was because the light Saint Force was only a temporary measure. Moreover, gathering the light Saint Force took a lot out of him, so Jian Chen wouldn't be able to keep it up forever. The light wind sword streaked by the forests in a huge ray of light. In a flash, it had caught up to the silver-striped golden snake and stabbed into its body near where its heart was. Against the fast speed of the light wind sword, the snake had no time to react at all. The sword easily penetrated its underside and through its heart. When the sword stabbed into its heart, the silver-striped golden snake shook heavily a final time before it came to a grinding halt. With a loud desolate hiss that shook the heavens, it fell to the ground lifelessly. Phew! Jian Chen let out a long breath of air. The heart that had previously leapt into his throat had finally calmed down, as Jian Chen had finally protected his life successfully. A loud metallic sound was heard as the light wind sword flew out of the silver-striped golden snake's body before flying around in the sky. Then it flashed towards Jian Chen, and returned back to his right hand. Seeing the sword in his hand, Jian Chen suppressed the elation in his heart. He immediately ran over to the body of the silver-striped golden snake. He needed to absorb the blood in order to detoxify himself. He had to do it now since in the magical beast mountain range, every moment delayed added to the unknown danger that existed. Walking shakily toward the nearly 50 meters long carcass of the snake, Jian Chen knelt down, grabbed onto the bleeding part of the snake's body to bring it to his mouth, and began to suck the blood without any hesitation. Gudong! Gudong! Without stopping, Jian Chen continued to swallow the snake's blood in large gulps. He could clearly feel the special energy from within the snake's blood as it entered his stomach. Wherever this blood flowed to, the slowly creeping poison there instantly began to lessen, as the blood quickly counteracted and cured the poison. Feeling the changes within his body, Jian Chen started to drink even more of the snake's blood at an even quicker rate, as if it was a delicious delicacy he couldn't get enough of. Chapter 92, Misfortune. Until Jian Chen was completely full from the fresh blood of the silver-striped golden snake, unable to drink another drop of snake blood, he then finally stopped drinking. Ah! Jian Chen tilted his head backwards and let loose a comfortable sound, then gasped for air. Inside his body, the massive amount of energy from the snake blood had accumulates in his stomach. Finally it began to assimilate into his veins at an extremely slow speed, absorbed by the body. At the same time, on the left part of his body including his shoulder where the venom was, the previously black skin color was rapidly fading, returning back to a normal skin color. Although the toxicity of the silver-striped golden snake's poison was incomparably strong, with only the snake's blood as the cure, this detoxifying process was also extremely fast. Not too long after, the poison inside Jian Chen's body was completely detoxified. Aside from the 2 initial bite marks left on his shoulder, the skin color of his body was back to normal. Seeing how his body was healthy once more, Jian Chen let out a sigh of relief. It was fortunate that in the very last moment when he was fighting the silver-striped golden snake, he had managed to successfully kill it. If not, even if he had had the light saint force to temporarily help him suppress the spread of the venom, he would not have been able to live past 3 days. After all, he was not able to maintain light saint force for a long period, since using his spirit consumed an extremely large amount of energy. Slowly standing on both feet, Jian Chen sized up the golden-colored snake that lay on the floor before him with no small amount of excitement. The silver-striped golden snake population didn't surpass 3 digits on the Tianyuan continent, so it could be said to be a very rare species. In addition, the body of the silver-striped golden snake was an extremely treasured commodity. This was no exaggeration, while the virulence of the poison was unmatched, its whole body was a treasure trove. It was said that the snake meat could not only help one improve their poison resistance, but also strengthen one's inner body. Although it would not be as monstrous as the defense of a silver-striped golden snake, it would still make one significantly stronger than before. And the gall of the silver-striped golden snake was said to be an extremely high-grade medicinal ingredient that could increase one's poison immunity if refined together with the blood of the silver-striped golden snake with a special method. It was even possible to create a body that was immune for thousands of different types of poison, unless the toxicity of the poison was stronger than that of a silver-striped golden snake, or another snake that was equally formidable. In all other cases, no poison under the heavens would pose a threat to the 10,000 immunity. The fangs of the silver-striped golden snake could also be synthesized into an extremely horrifying killing weapon. The fangs were constantly soaked from birth in the deadly venom day and night, to the point that the base quality of the fangs had slowly evolved. By this point, the venom had completely polluted the fangs, unable to be removed, and a single strike by those fangs would inject any enemy with the silver-striped golden snake's venom. If there was no silver-striped golden snake blood to act as an antidote, then the only outcome for one who was injected with the venom was death. This type of venom was capable of poisoning even Heaven's Saint Masters. Of course, this specific silver-striped golden snake didn't have a strong enough venom to kill a Heaven's Saint Master in a short moment, but it was strong enough that they would never be able to completely get rid of it. They would ultimately die from this venom if they didn't get the antidote, the snake's blood. Despite the venom being very strong, its toxicity was directly linked to the strength of the silver-striped golden snake. The stronger the snake was, the stronger its venom was. If a silver-striped golden snake were to reach the strength of a Class 6 magical beast, then its venom would definitely be capable of killing a Heaven's Saint Master in a flash. The snake's skin was not only soft, but it was also extremely durable, making it an extremely valuable material in producing armor. This gave it an incredibly high value. And with regards to the venom sac, it was considered to be priceless. This venom, when refined correctly, would become an odorless and colorless type of poison that could bypass any type of poison detection or people's senses. With this poison, even Heaven's Saint Masters would be hard-pressed to escape from death, since the only cure was the silver-striped golden snake's blood. The venom of the silver-striped golden snake appeared on the market several times, but every time it appeared, men with particularly special motives paid sky-high prices to purchase it. Silently remembering the information he had read about the various materials from the silver-striped golden snake in books, Jian Chen couldn't help but feel excited. This was the biggest profit he had harvested since he entered the magical beast mountain range. Jian Chen was especially tempted for the ability to be resistant to most poisons. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen began to work on the silver-striped golden snake's body. When it came to this corpse, he was definitely not going to ignore it like he had with the other magical beasts. After expending a bit of energy, Jian Chen finally dragged the rest of the snake's body out of the tall grass and piled it in one place. It wasn't until then that Jian Chen had realized that this silver-striped golden snake was actually 70 meters long in length. The silver-striped golden snake's strength could be determined by how long it was. A Class 1 silver-striped golden snake was 20 meters at the very least. With every increase in class, it would grow 20 meters in length, all the way to a maximum of 100 meters long at Class 5. Any Class 6 silver-striped golden snake or higher would already be able to freely manipulate their body dimensions, so it was useless trying to rank one by its body length. Judging from the length of this snake, it looked as if it was on the verge of breaking through to the Class 4 rank. Jian Chen retrieved the space ring on his neck given to him by his father when he had departed from the Changyang mansion. The space within the space ring was incomparably bigger compared to that of the space belt. If he wanted to bring this 70-meter-long snake away, the only possible solution was to use the space ring to store it. There was no way the space belt would be able to store the body within its tiny internal space. But if Jian Chen wanted to store the 70-meter-long silver-striped golden snake within his space ring, it was not an easy task. Just as he was about to start, his face suddenly changed as he abruptly turned his head around. Where Jian Chen was looking, he saw the shadows of some people from within the foliage walk out. Just as Jian Chen spotted them, they discovered his existence at the same time. What terrible luck! Jian Chen cursed, afraid that he was going to meet with some trouble. There was a total of 20 people who looked to be mercenaries from their outfit. The moment they saw Jian Chen, the mercenaries all looked a bit dumbfounded. To have come across Jian Chen, it was clear that this was unexpected. However, immediately after, their eyes were drawn to the coiled body of the silver-striped golden snake. Walking at the forefront of the other mercenaries was a middle-aged man that looked to be around 40 years old. After his gaze fell on the silver-striped golden snake, his brows slightly furrowed, revealing an expression deep in thought. Then, as if remembering something, his eyes flashed in realization. A look of extreme joy took over his entire face in an instant. As if he couldn't believe his eyes, he continued to focus on the snake's body behind Jian Chen. He cried out, "Silver-striped golden snake! This is actually the silver-striped golden snake!" The words of the mercenary caused every other mercenary behind him to be stunned, as if they had never heard of such a magical beast before. Not too long after, the memories they had regarding the silver-striped golden snake came back to them, causing their faces to change one by one. Looks of amazement and doubt filled their faces as they looked at the snake's corpse behind Jian Chen and evaluated it. After closer inspection, more and more shouts of surprise that they were not able to repress rang through the air. So this is the silver-striped golden snake. This really is the silver-striped golden snake. It looks exactly how the rumors describe it. I didn't think we'd come across a silver-striped golden snake here, we're rich. Every kind of surprised comment came from the mouths of the mercenaries as their eyes began to heat up from looking at the silver-striped golden snake. The avarice of greed in their eyes was shown on their faces, they didn't try to hide it. Jian Chen sighed to himself. He didn't think that such an unfortunate event would happen at such a crucial point. This was definitely the last thing he had wanted. It was a shame that fate didn't go as he had wished. Quickly hiding his space ring, the silver glow from his light wind sword appeared in his hand once more. Without any hesitation, he disappeared in a blur as he charged towards the group of mercenaries. The people in front of him had already recognized the silver-striped golden snake and its worth. There was no point in contemplating any further, since Jian Chen knew that these mercenaries would try to take the body from him by any means necessary. There was definitely no room for negotiation. Jian Chen crossed the 30 meters between them in a flash, the light wind sword immediately striking out. "Humph, you came. Good." The middle-aged man that was the leader was not weak at all, and returned to his sense. A cold expression took over his previous joy as he stared at Jian Chen, sneered, and summoned a great sword to his hand. With a single movement, he slashed at the charging Jian Chen. Just as the middle-aged man's sword was about to hit Jian Chen's trajectory suddenly changed. He dodged the sword and moved around the middle-aged man, attacking the group of mercenaries standing just behind the man. Chapter 93, Silencing by Killing. Seeing Jian Chen come at them at such a high speed, the mercenaries all came to their senses and summoned their saint weapons in preparation to attack him. Jian Chen didn't want to be entangled with them, so instead of taking the blows head-on, he dodged their attacks and quickly moved to their sides. In an instant, his sword sliced through the necks of two mercenaries. As the silver light disappeared, the two mercenaries became rigid as the light in their eyes slowly faded away. From their necks, a slow trickle of blood started to flow out for everyone to see. In the next instant, the blood suddenly began to surge out from their wounds as the bodies slowly toppled to the ground. Without slowing down, Jian Chen swept past the two dead bodies and charged at the hindmost mercenaries in the blink of an eye. These were the weakest of the group and thus were Jian Chen's first targets. Although there were around 20 mercenaries total, the majority of them were only saints and great saints. Only the first middle-aged man and one other were saint masters. Using the profound steps, Jian Chen immediately flickered behind the group. His light wind sword flashed as mercenaries continued to fall to his blade. The mercenaries who were only saints were unable to do anything against such a fast attack. Since they were unable to react at all, there was no way they could possibly resist. In the time it took to take a breath, the mercenaries that were barely at the saint level had died by Jian Chen's sword. The remaining people who were of the great saint level or above had already started to prepare themselves to defend against Jian Chen. Even after killing all of the weak saints, Jian Chen didn't pause at all. The light wind sword became a flash of silver lightning as he swung out at the one of the great saint mercenaries next to him. Seeing such a fast attack come at him, the mercenary's face immediately changed. Since there was no time to dodge, he could only desperately throw his battle-axe up in front of him. But Jian Chen's light wind sword was like a viper. With a single movement, its trajectory suddenly lowered and changed from aiming at the mercenary's throat to his heart. PFT. This time, the great saint mercenary wasn't able to react. The silver streak that was the light wind sword embedded itself deeply into the left side of the man's chest, piercing straight through his heart. Just as quickly as it entered, the sword was immediately pulled out of the man's chest. Jian Chen then began to move on to fiercely attack the other mercenaries. Seeing their comrades die so quickly right in front of their eyes, the remaining mercenaries all cried out in both anger and shock. "Bastard, go die! Give back the lives of our comrades!" The remaining great saint mercenaries all rallied together and raised their saint weapons to attack Jian Chen from various directions and seal off any possible escape routes Jian Chen had. Jian Chen let loose a subtle sneer before swinging his sword in a way that left a silver crescent trail behind. Like lightning, the sword pierced the other great saints. Ding! 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 In that short moment, Jian Chen's sword had rapidly hit 3 of the mercenaries' saint weapons dead on. With each collision, a metallic sound rang out, but Jian Chen had swung so fast, it was hard to differentiate separate weapons, as the sound was just like a single loud collisions. The moment the light wind sword made contact, a large amount of force was transmitted back through the mercenaries' saint weapons. Feeling the feedback transmitted back to them, the mercenaries' faces all changed. Unable to control their bodies, they were forced back a few steps. None of them had thought that such a slender sword would contain a power that was definitely not inferior to any others. The flash of light in that instant sparkled brightly with killing intent. Using the opportunity given by people suffering from temporary paralysis, Jian Chen approached the unmoving mercenary. The light wind sword became covered by a dense layer of sword qi, and it rapidly shot towards the mercenary's neck. Faced with such a fast sword, the mercenary hadn't managed to even regain his footing, couldn't put up any form of resistance at all. During his final moment, his expression of one of shock and anger at the sight of the light wind sword having already deeply pierced through his throat. Fresh blood suddenly burst forth directly from the hole, completely covering Jian Chen, as the sword was completely pushed through the body and out of the wound. Right at this moment, a strong gale attacked Jian Chen from behind. Jian Chen's eyes flashed as he immediately pulled his sword out from the neck of the mercenary he just killed. Jian Chen turned around with his sword qi-enhanced light wind sword, and quickly thrusted his blade behind him like a flash of silver-white lightning. Clang! The 2-finger-wide swords clashed against the 3-inch-wide blade in midair, neither saint weapon forced the other backwards, and the two were stuck in something like a stalemate. However, no one had noticed at the moment the swords had collided. Jian Chen's right arm had shaken twice afterwards. Jian Chen's eyes swiveled upwards to look at the owner of the great sword coldly. It was the middle-aged mercenary that had first spoken out before. The man was looking at him with an extremely overcast expression, but his eyes were filled with intense killing intent. Ha! The middle-aged man cried out angrily, the bloodlust flashing in his eyes. His left hand curled into a fist, and shot it out toward Jian Chen, bringing a bitter cold wind along with it. Jian Chen's eyes flashed coldly as he sneered. Against the middle-aged man's strong fist, he wouldn't run. Instead, Jian Chen would raise his own fist without fear. Bang! The fists collided against each other with a loud bang. At the moment of contact, a powerful shock wave came out from between the two and affected everything in all directions. Under this almost invisible force of strength, the surrounding trees nearby the two combatants began to sway. Even some of the weeds nearby were immediately flattened to the ground. As for the two fighters, the force of their blows caused a powerful aftershock that forced the two to retreat a few steps. Finally, at a distance of 10 m, the warrior was swaying back and forth while waiting for the opponent. The middle-aged man looked at Jian Chen with an intense glare. "Youngster, you're quite fast, I'll take great pleasure in disposing of you." The remaining great saint mercenaries began to gather behind the middle-aged man. Each one of them snarled at Jian Chen with an angry look. Jian Chen stared coldly at the group of mercenaries without saying a word. Since the silver-striped golden snake was now discovered by them, Jian Chen had no other choice but to silence them. With the experiences from his previous world, Jian Chen wasn't some new inexperienced youth. He knew that if the news about the silver-striped golden snake were to leak out, then it would bring him an endless amount of trouble since the snake was a very precious source of profit. Many of the major wealthy clans would go to war in order to obtain the silver-striped golden snake. If he were to come across those clans, it would be even worse than his current troubles with the Huayun sect, so this was something that Jian Chen wanted to avoid at all costs. Thus, with this chance, Jian Chen definitely wanted to kill the mercenaries here to stop the rumors before they started. There were only 11 mercenaries left in the group aside from the middle-aged Saint Master. Another man that looked to be 30 years old had also possessed near Saint Master's strength. Amongst this mercenary group, it was only that 30-year-old man and middle-aged man that could threaten Jian Chen. Seeing that Jian Chen wasn't talking, the middle-aged man spoke out loud, "My fellow brothers, attack with me. If we kill him, not only will our dead comrades be avenged, but that silver-striped golden snake will be ours. If we can take that silver-striped golden snake, then we will no longer have to risk our lives in the magical beast mountain range in order to earn a profit." With that, the middle-aged man charged towards Jian Chen, with the rest of the mercenaries following right behind him. Jian Chen still didn't say anything, but the fighting spirit within his heart had unconsciously reached a high point. Raising the light wind sword, Jian Chen activated his profound steps and flew towards the group of mercenaries. Ha! Seeing the charging Jian Chen, the middle-aged man's eyes revealed the killing intent within them. He brought his great sword high up into the air to prepare for splitting Jian Chen's head in two later. Jian Chen sneered once more. He had no wish to meet with the middle-aged man. Altering his path, he slid by the man and continued onwards to fight the weaker mercenaries. But the middle-aged man had already taken a loss before from the very same tactics. He could only see the great sword suddenly change angles in midair as the path was changed with only brute force. Afterwards, the great sword followed behind Jian Chen, swept past his shadow, then continued to slash horizontally toward Jian Chen. The great sword was definitely fast as well. As it traveled towards Jian Chen's back, it carried about a strong gust of wind that immediately cut into Jian Chen's waist without obstruction. However, there were no signs of a smile on the middle-aged man's face. Instead, his gaze hardened as he realized Jian Chen's body gradually disappeared. Mirror image. He growled. Chapter 94, Annihilating E. Very one highlight above for chapter title Avoiding the Middle-Aged Man's Great Sword. Jian Chen appeared in front of the other mercenaries with his light wind sword, stabbing out multiple times in unbroken succession. At the same time, the mercenaries raised their saint weapons one after another to swing at him. Ding ding ding. The noise of many weapons colliding could be heard. In a brief moment, Jian Chen used an unimaginably fast speed to slash out dozens of times, causing the saint weapons that the mercenaries attacked him with to deviate from their original trajectories. Afterwards, Jian Chen's actions contained no hesitation as the light wind sword in his hand emitted an indistinct sword glow. Taking advantage of the moment where the mercenaries were trying to bring their saint weapons in their hands back under control, the light wind sword once again transformed into dozens of silvery white flashes that pierced outwards. PF. 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 In that short moment, Jian Chen's light wind sword stabbed out 3 times, each one accurately hitting the throats of 3 different mercenaries. Their bodies went rigid immediately as their throats started to leak blood, dyeing their necks red. Slowly, their bodies fell to the ground. At that moment, a sharp sound carrying a strong amount of power pierced the air, whooshing in from the side. Sensing this strength that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, Jian Chen immediately turned around and shifted toward the side by 2 meters. But before Jian Chen could get to the side safely, another surge of wind came at Jian Chen and arrived right in front of him in a blink of an eye. Jian Chen's face didn't change at all as he brought his light wind sword to block the frontal attack. Clang! A huge sword heavily smashed against Jian Chen's light wind sword, causing Jian Chen to fly back uncontrollably by quite a few meters. Whoosh! As Jian Chen flew through the air, a long silver spear chased after Jian Chen's heart with an ear-piercing whistle. Sensing that the silver spear had a great amount of saint force within it, Jian Chen grew solemn as he saw the second saint master had finally taken action. Jian Chen stamped down onto the ground fiercely, leaving a deep footprint as he forcibly stopped his body from continuously retreating backwards. His right hand shook as his light wind sword slashed at the spear in front of him without fear. Ding! The tips of the light wind sword and spear collided into each other in midair. Seeing this, Jian Chen's eyes flashed coldly as an intense amount of sword qi escaped from his sword. It transmitted through the spear toward the 30-year-old man. Catching on to what Jian Chen was planning, the 30-year-old man sneered. Following after, an enormous amount of saint force came flooding out from his body, coursing along the spear toward the light wind sword. It stopped Jian Chen's sword qi in the spear from moving any closer. Immediately afterwards, the sword qi momentarily stopped advancing forward due to the collision with the flood of saint force that moved like a galloping wild horse. This weakened its advancing speed. Jian Chen's eyes flashed dangerously as he began to increase the amount of energy to fight against the man. Immediately, an intense amount of sword qi surged outwards, smashing against the saint force of the other man without fear. Bang! As Jian Chen's unique sword qi made contact with the other mercenary's saint force, a loud explosion was heard. The energy from the contact exploded outwards, with the colliding saint weapons as the epicenter. The shock wave caused the two fighters to be blown backwards. With each step they traveled, the mercenary left a deep footprint from stepping heavily on the ground. However, Jian Chen's body looked incomparably nimble. As his toes lightly made contact with the ground, he swayed momentarily before quickly shaking off that backwards momentum. However, just as Jian Chen stabilized his body, a fierce force came from behind him and approached his body in a blink of an eye. Jian Chen's face changed slightly. Just from his recent encounter against that mercenary, he had used up a lot of energy. At the moment, he was lacking some strength, and was unable to gather enough saint force to resist the incredibly strong Saint Master's attack from behind him. In a moment of desperation, Jian Chen rolled to the ground to evade, but even so, the great sword had landed a wound on his back, so deep that even the bone could be seen. Ha! Seeing that he now had the upper hand, he raised his sword mercilessly once more to slash at Jian Chen. Feeling a burning sharp sensation in his back, Jian Chen bit his lip as his left hand hit the floor. His entire body immediately flew upwards. Then, his body slightly twisted to the side, barely dodging the second sword stroke from the man by a hair. However, his light wind sword flashed like a bolt of lightning as it pierced towards the older mercenary at an extremely fast speed. The older man was alarmed. Since he had just swung his saint weapon, it was far too late for him to pull it back and defend himself. Forced by the desperate situation, the man tilted his head narrowly to dodge the sword piercing towards his throat. However, despite managing to dodge the fatal blow, the sword had still left a small nick on his neck that dripped with blood. With a grim smile, Jian Chen twisted his wrist to allow his light wind sword to chase after the other man's neck once more, before the man could even react. Immediately after the silver light wind sword flashed across the man's neck, his face became rigid as blood began to pulsate out of his neck in small waves. "Why you?" The man's eyes opened wide as he looked at Jian Chen in disbelief. He strained to lift his hand, fingers slowly shaking as it pointed at Jian Chen. It seemed as if he wanted to say something, but the wound on his neck prevented him from doing so. In the end, the man wordlessly collapsed on the ground. Seeing the dead man, the remaining mercenaries could only be extremely shocked. They began to look at Jian Chen with expressions of extreme dread. Upon killing the middle-aged man, Jian Chen didn't leave any time for the other mercenaries to catch their breaths. With his light wind sword, he began to run towards the remaining people. Seeing Jian Chen approach, the single remaining Saint Master mercenary moved forward to block him. With a thrust, his long spear immediately disappeared and reappeared in a blur towards Jian Chen. The other great saint mercenaries had been intimidated by the death of the middle-aged Saint Master, and were afraid of charging forward. The idea of retreating had already been planted within their hearts. If not for the other Saint Master-level mercenary, then they would had already long since run away. Ding ding ding, a series of colliding sounds sung throughout the forest as Jian Chen and the 30-year-old mercenary exchanged a dozen blows at a lightning-fast speed in a brief moment. Now that there were no outside factors, Jian Chen's sword chi had swiftly helped him take the advantage and completely suppressed the other person. In the blink of an eye, the youth was forced onto the defensive. Because Jian Chen's swordplay was far too fast, the 30-year-old mercenary didn't dare attack. Instead, he continued defending himself, reacting to Jian Chen's movements. He was afraid that if he were to try to attack, then Jian Chen would be able to swiftly use that moment to kill him before the man could even complete the attack. Not only that, but Jian Chen was fighting him at close range. The 30-year-old mercenary wasn't able to show off the true power of his long spear at such a short distance, so he was left with the feeling of having one arm tied behind his back. After attaining the Great Saint level, Jian Chen's battle strength had improved several times over. So with his current strength, he could contend against those a level higher than him on equal footing. After a dozen high-speed blows were exchanged, the two were finally split apart. However, the 30-year-old man looked to be in a sorry state as his clothes were completely ruined by this point. A few parts of his body had deep-looking wounds, and even his neck had a thin line from where Jian Chen had only barely cut apart the first layer of skin. As for Jian Chen, besides the single wound on his back, he didn't look very different. The only change was that his face had grown paler. Staring at Jian Chen with a hardened face, the 30-year-old mercenary said, "The enemy is far too strong. I'll stall him while everyone else runs away." After fighting Jian Chen, the 30-year-old mercenary knew how fast and strong Jian Chen was. In the mercenary's heart, he knew that it was possible he wouldn't be leaving here alive, so he had to take the worst plan of action for himself. He had realized another thing in his heart regarding the situation with the silver-striped golden snake. For the sake of keeping this matter a secret, Jian Chen would definitely kill anyone that tried to leave this place. He wouldn't let anyone spread details about the situation. If it was the mercenary who was in this situation, he would have done the same thing. This was the rule for survival for the Tian Yuan continent. Everything was decided by the fist. Whoever was strongest would have the last laugh. Hearing these words, the remaining mercenaries all started a bit before immediately running away from the area in all directions. Seeing every mercenary scamper away, Jian Chen's face darkened. He slashed his sword to try to kill the man quickly. "Ah!" The 30-year-old mercenary let loose a battle cry as he moved towards Jian Chen without fear. Because of the speed Jian Chen demonstrated, the man knew that it was unlikely that he would be leaving here alive. Rather than dying with everyone else, he had decided that it was better to use his life to garner some time for everyone else. Once the news of the silver-striped golden snake was leaked out, there would be no shortage of people to avenge him. Ding! The light wind sword collided with the long spear once again, causing sparks to fly out between the two. Then, under the 30-year-old mercenary's control, the sword was flipped on top of the spear and was immediately sent flying into the air as he performed a move on instinct. At this, the man looked on with shock. However, a joyous look soon appeared on his face as he immediately manipulated the spear to stab straight towards Jian Chen's throat. Jian Chen smiled in disdain as his palms suddenly filled with very strong saint force. Both palms disappeared into a blur, and his hands blurred as they shot out to grab onto the spear shaft tightly. At the same time, the light wind sword that had been knocked into the air suddenly stopped, as it began to pulse out a shroud of sword chi that enveloped the sword. With a large glow, the light wind sword traveled through the air quickly, like a flash of light, appearing as if it could cut open a space in the air. With an ear-piercing whistle, the sword bore through the man's throat, disappearing into the nearby forest area. "Ah! Ah!" Suddenly, the loud cries of a few people could be heard from within the forests. The soul sword was Jian Chen's last resort. Until it was the final moment, Jian Chen would not use it easily. Chapter 95, Pitiful Prophet. Using the soul sword, Jian Chen had caught the Saint Master off guard and killed him. The other mercenaries who had run off in all directions to escape had fallen one after another to Jian Chen's sword. The silver glow from the sword flashed as it shot towards Jian Chen. Holding his hand into the air, the sword immediately returned to its rightful place in his hands. As it smacked into his palms, a fierce amount of sword chi briefly shot out from the sword. A few moments after the light wind sword returned to Jian Chen, the intense atmosphere coming from the sword suddenly disappeared without a trace. Soon after, the light wind sword also slowly disappeared. Jian Chen let out a long breath of air. He had already fought 2 battles in a row. This wasn't an easy feat to do. After killing the silver-striped golden snake and then killing the 2 Saint Master mercenaries, Jian Chen's internal saint force was all but gone. If it wasn't for the fact that his azulate sword law was a unique technique, his saint force would not have gained so many mystical effects. Without it, Jian Chen would have been unable to kill the silver-striped golden snake, let alone fight another battle after it. Jian Chen shifted his body. Just as he began to move, the wound on his back immediately seared with hot pain. The muscles on Jian Chen's face twitched a few times due to the strong feeling of pain. This really hurts. Jian Chen hissed under his breath. Wanting to move, his powerful soul gathered a large amount of the light saint force from the world essence towards him. Slowly, a large indistinct white ball of light that had appeared around him began to slowly turn milky white. Although the light was dazzling, it was extremely warm, and did not hurt the eyes at all. Bathing in the glow of the milky white light, Jian Chen's figure became so indistinct within the glow that it was hard to see him. Even the deep cut on his back was quickly healing itself under the energy of the light saint force. Under this light saint force, a comfortable and refreshing feeling spontaneously arose from his chest, and quickly spread throughout his entire body. It bypassed Jian Chen's self-control, and he could barely hold himself back from. Although he had already used the light saint force before while trying to resist the silver-striped golden snake's venom, his attention had been stretched thinly at that time, so he hadn't noticed the feeling of happiness the light saint force had brought to him. But now that he could fully focus, Jian Chen finally realized how much of a pleasure the light saint force could give. The light saint force continued on for a while before gradually disappearing, showing Jian Chen's body once more. Jian Chen twisted his arm behind his back to feel the wound that was previously there, but he could only feel smooth skin. Although the shirt he was wearing was moist with blood, he didn't feel any type of pain, and not a hint of a scar could be found. Nodding his head in satisfaction, Jian Chen began to smile at the miraculous results the light saint force had shown. With a skill like this, Jian Chen's ability to save his own life would be even more bountiful on the Tianyuan continent from now on. Just then, a dizzy sensation struck Jian Chen as the world seemed to sway twice for him. The dizzy spell was over in a moment only to be replaced with a wave of exhaustion. At that moment, Jian Chen felt that he had not slept for a whole day and night, and was in a very serious state of weariness. Jian Chen wanted to just find a bed and sleep in it right then. What a pity, the soul sword and the light saint force brings about such a high energy consumption. Right now my soul is evidently all used up. Jian Chen gloomily sighed to himself. He knew that in the future, he would have to refrain from using the soul sword and light saint force too much. Otherwise, if he ran out of soul in the future, it would majorly affect his fighting strength. Fortunately, while his soul was for the most part exhausted, it was not at a critical point yet, so his fighting strength was not impacted by that much. Taking out an intact set of clothes from within his space belt, Jian Chen looked at the few mercenaries on the ground. Looking at the space belts on their waists, anticipation flashed through Jian Chen's eyes. I hope there's a few good things in them. Jian Chen thought to himself. On the Tianyuan continent, a majority of people generally put all of their valuables within their space belts. It could be said that a single space belt could contain a person's life savings. Of course, many weaker mercenaries were very poor, and so they wouldn't have much in their space belts. Walking past the mercenaries without touching their space belts, Jian Chen quickly walked up to the silver-striped golden snake and put it in his space ring. Since the silver-striped golden snake was huge, it had taken Jian Chen the same amount of time it took for a candle wick to burn to store the snake in the space ring. Placing the space ring within the folds of his inner robes once more, Jian Chen let loose a breath in relaxation as an inconcealable feeling of joy took hold. An unpoisonable body. Recollections of the good benefits of the 10,000 immunity came flashing back into Jian Chen's head. Right now, he had the body of the silver-striped golden snake. And although he had swallowed a good amount of the snake's blood, the rest of it was still within the body of the snake. It could be said that given enough time, Jian Chen could take the silver-striped golden snake's blood and gall bladder and refine them to gain an unpoisonable body. Slowly calming down his heart, Jian Chen walked towards the bodies of the mercenaries once more and removed their space belts. Making sure they didn't have any additional items, he departed from the area and disappeared into the forest. Once Jian Chen was far enough, he found an empty spot to sit down with his legs crossed. He then took out the 20 space belts, and began to look through them. The items within the space belts were numerous, a good majority of them were essentials that were needed to survive within the Tianyuan continent. Comforters, tents, food and water accounted for half of the items, while the rest were all items of little worth. There were pitiful amounts of silver and copper coins stacked on top of each other within the space belts, but Jian Chen did not feel inclined to take such a trifle amount. After going through quite a few of the space belts, Jian Chen still couldn't find any items of value. The space belts only had items for everyday use like bandages and herbs. There wasn't even a single Class 1 monster core to be seen. Jian Chen didn't have a surprised look on his face, since he knew that these mercenaries were here in the Magical Beast Mountain range to earn a profit in the first place. To be trying to earn money in such a place could only mean that they were poor. The most valuable items they could possibly have would be a few low-leveled monster cores. After going through half of the space belts, Jian Chen finally found one that had a small pile of around a dozen monster cores, but they were all pretty much Class 1 or Class 2. Taking the monster cores from the space belt, Jian Chen continued to look through the rest of the space belts. Quickly, Jian Chen had finished looking through the 20 space belts and casually tossed them to the side. Turning his head back to look at the small pile of monster cores and money, Jian Chen couldn't help but have a look of helplessness. From the 20 space belts, he had only collected around 20 monster cores and almost 100 gold coins. Among those 20 monster cores, there was a single Class 3 monster core, 6 Class 2 monster cores, and the rest were only Class 1 monster cores. Not knowing if he should laugh or cry, Jian Chen shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Isn't this profit way too low? There were 2 Saint Masters within the group and yet they still have only this pitiful amount of monster cores. I could get more by myself in a single day." Storing the gold coins and monster cores within his own space belt, Jian Chen left the area. The following day, Jian Chen drifted through the depths of the magical beast forest. However, after being chased by the silver-striped golden snake, he was already very close to the abyss of the magical beast mountain range. The majority of the magical beasts here would be at the Class 3 level, and a very few of them would be at the Class 2 level. Compared to the great saint-level Jian Chen, Class 3 magical beasts were no longer as much of a threat as they once were. Although it took some more effort to kill them, the profits here would be greater since there were more Class 3 magical beasts than Class 2 magical beasts. A single Class 3 monster core had the same amount of energy as 10 Class 2 monster cores, and even the purity of the energy within the core was better than the Class 2 monster core. They were necessary for Jian Chen to use to cultivate, as 3 Class 3 monster cores would most likely take him the entire night with his terribly fast rate of consumption. In the blink of an eye, Jian Chen had spent another 10 days in the forest where he hunted for magical beasts in the day and cultivated in isolation at night. After those 10 days, Jian Chen's strength had improved by leaps and bounds. Although he was still at the primary Great Saint level, he could clearly sense that he was not all that far away from the middle Great Saint level. During these 10 days, Jian Chen would spend each day walking through the mountains carefully with one of the Class 3 monster cores in hand. At one point, Jian Chen had come across a Class 4 magical beast, but it was far too strong for him to fight against. After a dozen blows, Jian Chen had escaped while suffering from a serious injury. From that point on, Jian Chen had recognized the strength of a Class 4 magical beast, so he continued to fight against Class 3 magical beasts instead. Afterwards, whenever he encountered a Class 4 magical beast, he would just run away immediately without provoking it. Chapter 96, A Lucky Encounter with a Woman by the River. Highlight above for chapter title. Over the course of those 10 days, Jian Chen had hunted many Class 3 magical beasts. Although there weren't as many beasts as when he had hunted in Kargath Forest, the profits he had received were still high. He had about 20 Class 3 monster cores, which was only a little bit more than how many Class 2 monster cores he had. Considering how fast he had initially cultivated the 3 Class 3 monster cores from before, he would probably finish cultivating the rest of the cores in around 7 days. What Jian Chen didn't know, however, was that since he was traveling alone in the Magical Beast mountain range, magical beasts would come upon him more frequently than if he was in a large group of mercenaries. This was because many magical beasts on the mountain range had an extremely sensitive sense of smell and high vigilance. Since they had lived their entire lives on the mountain range, their ability to track footprints was remarkable, and so if they had come across a strong group with many footprints, then the magical beasts would carefully run far away from them. So although the magical beasts did not have any intellect, their own survival had ingrained themselves deep within their minds. But if they were to come across a weak or single person that they were sure they could kill and eat, then the previously hiding magical beasts would come out and search for that person. They wouldn't need to use an extraordinary amount of energy to chase after and hunt their prey, so since Jian Chen was by himself in this place, the chance of encountering a magical beast was greatly increased. If it wasn't for the fact that Jian Chen's spirit was strong enough to detect movements around him, he would have been beaten black and blue by the sneak attacks from some magical beasts. The next day, the cross-legged Jian Chen finally opened his eyes as he awoke from his cultivation on top of a tree branch, and jumped down onto the ground. Dusting himself off, he took a look at the monster cores he had stored within his space belt. During this short amount of time, he had collected a decent amount of monster cores, and even though he had used many cores to cultivate, his space ring still had plenty of cores in stock. There are still 50 Class 2 monster cores and 120 Class 3 monster cores. Checking the inventory within the space belt, Jian Chen nodded his head in satisfaction. Currently he was using 20 Class 2 monster cores to cultivate with per night, and his space belt only had enough for 2 days' worth of cultivation at most. All of the other monster cores added together would last for over 10 days. I still have 2 Class 4 monster cores, one is from the prize given by Kargath Academy, and another is what father gave to me. Since the Class 4 monster core has way more energy inside it than a Class 3 monster core has, I don't know how long a single Class 4 monster core will last me. Jian Chen thought. He didn't realize that the amount of monster cores within his possession was considered a massive pile of wealth. To Jian Chen, it was just a way to sustain his cultivation for a mere 10 days. Looking up at the bright sun overhead, he immediately discerned his location and began to walk off towards the outskirts of the Magical Beast mountain range without even stopping to eat breakfast. By this point, the amount of time Jian Chen had spent in the mountain range was quite long. The monster cores in his space ring were more than enough for him to cultivate with for a few days, but the supplies he had on hand were about to run out. So for that reason, Jian Chen needed to return to Wake City to replenish his supplies. Not only that, but he also needed to handle the silver-striped golden snake within his space ring, otherwise if left alone long enough, who knew what type of situation would occur. For example, the body might rot away. Jian Chen wasn't too sure about such things, since he hadn't read about them in the books. So for the sake of achieving his goal, Jian Chen wanted to get the silver-striped golden snake matter over with as soon as possible. Throughout the mountain range was the scent of bloodshed, something magical beasts were especially sensitive to. It would be incredibly unwise if he were to keep the body of the silver-striped golden snake here, so Jian Chen decided to take it back to Wake City and plan from there. The Magical Beast mountain range had plenty of dense tall grass and just as many swamps. It was hard to detect them just by looking, but as Jian Chen traveled on the road, he kept an eye out everywhere. During the past days he had spent in the mountain range, he had already sunk into the swamps a few times before ultimately escaping from them. Under the guidance of the blazing sun, Jian Chen managed to leave the magical beast mountain range without deviating from the path too much. After walking for 2 days, he finally exited the depths of the mountain range and entered the flat lands of the forest. Within those 2 days, Jian Chen's space belt had gained even more Class 2 monster cores. Taking in a deep breath of the fresh air within the forest, Jian Chen tilted his head to look at the clothes he had fashioned from animal hides with a grim smile. With his current appearance, he looked like a beggar. It was a shame that there wasn't much water within the mountain range, making it impossible for Jian Chen to wash the stink off of himself. Jian Chen hadn't forgotten about the river at the outskirts of the forest. Throwing off his animal hide clothes, he leapt into the depths of the water and began to cleanse himself of the grime he had collected. The amount of body odor and dirt he had amassed over the past days had already covered his body like armor, making him feel sick every time he moved. He wasn't comfortable at all with the sticky yet greasy feeling on his skin, but he had felt restraint while in the magical beast mountain range. Yet as soon as the river came into view, he had immediately thrown off that restraint and leapt into the water. Jian Chen wrapped the space belt around his neck as he began to knead at his entire body. His arms continued to rub everywhere as the water nearby him began to turn black with contamination. Even after washing himself in the river, he didn't leave the waters. Instead, he floated on his back and slowly closed his eyes, allowing the river to wash over him. For the first time in a long time, his mind was at rest as he relaxed under the pleasure of the icy cold waters. The past few days had been taxing on his mind, as he traveled within the mountain range. Now that his mind was at rest, the very depths of his soul felt free, letting Jian Chen finally sleep in peace. Jian Chen closed his eyes as he laid back in the water and took a gentle bath from the cold water from the river and the warm rays from the sun. His naked body bobbed up and down the river as he floated along with the waves. As the river flowed, he began to float towards the direction of Wake City, letting Jian Chen have a free ride for a while. So while he was traveling for free, he could take in a bit of enjoyment from the ride. After a while, Jian Chen completely lost track of time. He didn't know how long it had been since he was traveling down the river, but at that moment, Jian Chen's head bumped into something soft. The moment he felt contact, Jian Chen was brought back to awareness and focused on whatever he had hit. Whatever he had hit, it was moving. An animal. Jian Chen thought in his drowsy state of mind. In an instant, he sobered up and reactivated his spirit to an active level. The surrounding environment became known to Jian Chen as he instantly changed from sluggish state to his concentrated state. His previously closed eyes snapped wide open to reveal his bright eyes. Immediately, he flipped his body over from his laid-back position to be on his legs. The water rose to his waist, leaving only the top half of his body above the water. As he completed that action, the face of a person came into view. It was the face of a woman that could cause a city to fight over her and could even be considered to be a snowy white face of perfection. The 5 facial features on her face were perfectly matched up to the point that even a picky person wouldn't be able to find a fault within them. She was like a fairy that had descended onto the mortal world. The woman did not look all that old, roughly around years old. Within her sparkling white eyes were beautiful and dark pupils. She sluggishly stared back at Jian Chen's eyes. Below, her considerably big were exposed to the air, and were only separated from Jian Chen by a narrow margin. What terrible luck! To think that there was a woman taking a bath here. Jian Chen thought immediately as his face began to darken. Thanks to his previous experiences, he knew just what was happening here. He didn't think that while drifting away on the river to relax after wandering the magical beast mountain range, he would stumble across a woman bathing in the very same river he was in. Ah! Just as Jian Chen realized what was happening, the small eyes of the woman in front of him opened wide as she too realized what had just happened, and a scream came out of her mouth. You stinking scoundrel! Her previously sluggish eyes turned red-hot with anger and shame as she screamed and swung her arm rapidly at Jian Chen's chest. Bang! Before Jian Chen could even react, the woman's palm had already hit his chest with a muffled sound. Jian Chen was then sent flying backwards over the waters as a small stream of blood came pouring out of his mouth. Chapter 97, Mysterious Old Man. Highlight above for title. The palm sent Jian Chen flying backwards into the air by 20 meters before sinking back down into the river. A look of astonishment flashed through Jian Chen's eyes as he felt the strong energy from her hand. That single strike had caused a decent injury on him, as the bones where she had hit started to hurt as if something heavy had smashed into it. Jian Chen's arm paddled through the water briefly before he leapt into the forests on the opposite side of the river. Hiding behind a broad tree, he used his Saint Force to evaporate the water droplets on him before taking the space ring from his necklace. With a simple motion, he pulled out the last intact piece of clothing and put it on. Just as Jian Chen put on his robes, his already pale face froze momentarily before leaping towards the side in a hurry. Bang! Just as Jian Chen dodged to the side, the tree he had previously been hiding in exploded into splinters as a tremendous amount of pure Saint Force exploded on over. As it landed where Jian Chen was once at, the dirt around it was sent flying as a huge crater was left behind in the impact zone. You scoundrel, to think that you would peek at me taking a bath, I will definitely kill you. There was a small mournful tone mixed in within her angry words as her face grew redder by the second in front of Jian Chen. Her jade-like white hands carried a blue-colored Saint Force before flying at Jian Chen so fast that it whistled through the air. Feeling the huge amount of Saint Force within her palm, Jian Chen's face changed rapidly and became abnormally solemn. Gathering up the Saint Force within himself, he concentrated it in his right hand and lashed out. Bang! The two palms collided against each other with a muffled explosion as the shockwave flew out in all directions. Jian Chen was sent flying backwards violently, crashing through various bushes before finally slumping to the ground. PFF. A mouthful of blood splashed out from Jian Chen's mouth and formed a small bloody mist for a brief moment. As it escaped from his mouth, his face grew deathly pale. With difficulty, Jian Chen tilted his head upwards in disbelief at the woman in front of him. She wasn't too far away from Jian Chen's age and yet she had such an unbelievably strong amount of strength. He had estimated that she possessed great Saint Master strength at the very least. This was deduced by the fact that Jian Chen knew his own strength like the back of his hand, especially after fighting against Saint Masters while in the Magical Beast Mountain range. With his current strength, even Saint Masters wouldn't be able to contend against him. So the woman right in front of him was an unbelievably strong opponent that he wasn't able to defeat with ease with his current strength. Great Saint Master! Jian Chen swallowed nervously. To think that the woman in front of him was actually that strong, Jian Chen couldn't believe it. In Kargath Academy, where every single gifted individual of Jesson Kingdom was gathered, there were still quite a number of young women of the same age as the woman in front of him that weren't even able to condense the saint weapon to promote into the saint level. The woman slowly walked towards Jian Chen with the beauty of an immortal that could almost be said to be unmatched within the world. Her beautiful eyes were filled with shame and indignation, her fury slowly tearing away her charm. Covered with a strong killing intent as she gave the death glare towards Jian Chen, it looked as if she had wanted nothing more but to make mincemeat out of him. The woman wore a pink leather robe that was rather messy. It was clear to see that she had thrown it on quickly without sparing enough time to smooth herself out. Her long hair was draped behind her shoulder and clung to her waist as water droplets slowly made contact with her robes. With her pink slippers that made no sound as she walked, the lady walked towards Jian Chen slowly with a blue-colored sword in hand. Seeing the sword with such a color, Jian Chen's face changed. With difficulty, Jian Chen slowly crawled up from the ground as his right hand began to tremble. The woman was surely very strong. In a single blow, Jian Chen's right arm had already suffered from such a critical blow. Controlling the light saint force within the air, Jian Chen had made sure that the healing effects of the light saint force couldn't be seen by his opponent first. When it came to the special attribute that was the light saint force, he did not want anyone to know about the milky white glow or healing abilities. Hold on, miss. This was just a misunderstanding. I had no intentions on peeking on the miss taking a bath. Jian Chen laughed. The power of the lady's strength had amazed him. You scoundrel, just shut up for me. The woman's beautiful face turned ashen as she heard Jian Chen. It was clear to see that she was not feeling better, and so with a single stride, her pink shoe lashed out at Jian Chen's groin. Jian Chen's body swayed to the side by this and dodged it by a narrow margin. Soon after that moment, she turned around and chopped at Jian Chen with her blue-colored sword. The blue sword was traveling fast, and in a blink of an eye, it was already by Jian Chen's figure. Seeing this, Jian Chen began to turn around, but despite this, there was still a large sword wound that appeared on Jian Chen's chest. Blood began to fly out like a fountain as it flowed from his body violently. In a flash, Jian Chen's newest pair of clothing had been dyed red with blood. Unable to realize he was cut, a burning sensation began to swell up within Jian Chen as he realized there was pain happening. Quickly, he began to gain some distance from her while letting the slender form of the light wind sword appear within his hand. Although Jian Chen had chanced upon the sight of her naked body, this was not on purpose. He had already apologized 3 or 4 times, but the lady was still so angry and calling for his death. This brought about no small amount of anger from her. The young woman did not plan on letting Jian Chen go at all and chased after him. Her blue sword carried a type of saint force that seemed to sound like waves as it slashed towards Jian Chen. Jian Chen let loose a groan as his eyes flashed with an icy cold glare. Despite the lady being stronger, he wasn't the type of person to sit around and wait to be captured. With the wave of his hand, the light wind sword sprung into action. In a streak of silver, the sword attacked at the throat of the would-be murderer. The sword was already going as fast as it possibly could, but the strength of his opponent wasn't so great that he would not dare try to block the attack. He would do whatever it takes to win, even if his opponent was a girl. Jian Chen didn't hesitate at all. Just as the blue sword was about to make contact with Jian Chen again, he twisted his body and caused the sword to narrowly scrape against his armpit. Jian Chen on the other hand already had his sword pointed at her throat. At that moment, the lady let loose an expression full of panic as she gave a small shout. Immediately turning his neck, she had dodged Jian Chen's stab at her throat, but despite all that, there was a thin line of blood that leaked out from the small wound the sword had made. Feeling a small pain in her neck, the lady had a small expression of panic as her beautiful eyes finally began to reveal the tiniest amount of fear. Seeing this, Jian Chen began to smile inwardly. Although the woman was strong, she did not have enough combat experience, so in this fight, she was at a disadvantage. However, Jian Chen didn't plan on letting the woman go either. Feeling the sharp burning pain inflicted onto him by her, Jian Chen's light wind sword became indistinct as it chased after the woman. The woman's face grew even more panicked as the light wind sword began to pierce through her body. Suddenly, the woman's body suddenly disappeared from Jian Chen's line of sight before reappearing 10 meters away for some strange reason, as if it was some sort of magic trick. Jian Chen's heart trembled as he watched the girl reappear 10 meters away from him. But when he saw that the girl's face was paling, it looked like it had taken a great amount of energy to use such a fast movement technique. Could it be this is a special type of battle skill? Jian Chen thought. You scoundrel! To think you would raise your hand against a woman, this one will not let you go. To be put in such a state by a weaker person, the girl was furious. After yelling at Jian Chen, the blue-colored sword in her hand began to glow brighter as all of the saint force within her surged out and pulsed around the sword. The woman raised her sword and yelled, "First form of the Imperial Water Arts, Water Dragon Strike." As she spoke, the concentrated amount of saint force within her sword took on the form of a dragon almost instantaneously before breaking away from the sword and charged at Jian Chen. Jian Chen's face changed the very moment he saw the blurry form of the dragon come out from the sword. When the dragon came into view, Jian Chen had felt a strong sense of pressure, making him feel like he was carrying a 1,000-pound rock on his back. Just breathing was already a heavy task, let alone dodging. His face changed even more drastically as he realized his current situation. The only way to defend himself against this water dragon was to dodge, but he was incapable of doing so. He knew that the amount of Saint force within the water dragon was strong enough that he wouldn't be able to take it without it inflicting serious damage. Such a threatening person, don't blame me if I treat you badly. Jian Chen's eyes glinted dangerously as sword chi began to swirl around his sword once more. Once fully enveloped, the sword lifted off from Jian Chen's hands and shot towards the woman at such a speed that even the naked eye would have difficulty spotting it. When the woman saw the sword coming at her, the wound on her neck began to sting faintly. The lady grew pale with fright. The secret technique she had used to dodge Jian Chen's blow earlier had taken up a lot of energy as well as with the water dragon. Right now her internal Saint force was practically empty, so she wasn't able to dodge the sword. Desperately, she commanded the water dragon to come back and block the incoming sword. Immediately, the water dragon turned around and chased after the light wind sword. Opening up its giant jaw, it snapped at the light wind sword. However, the light wind sword was incomparably faster than the dragon. As the jaws of the water dragon snapped shut, it only tasted air as the sword was now just a meter away from the lady's neck. Outrageous, to have the audacity to raise a hand against the young miss. At this critical moment, a furious aged man came flying from the skies, shouting in a loud tone that echoed throughout the area. The figure of a large man flew out and stood in front of the woman, blocking the light wind sword. This was an elderly man around the age of, with a large build that seemed to have a height of 2 meters tall. He wore a white robe that had his hair trailing behind him with a jade ring holding it in place. His sharp eyes with matching white eyebrows had made him look like a very sharp individual. Seeing the light wind sword travel towards him, the elderly man couldn't help but have a look of disdain. With a sneer, he lifted his powerful-looking right arm into the air and caught the blade in between his 2 fingers. Despite the strong amount of sword chi, it had not damaged the elderly man at all. Right after, the elder waved his other arm at the incoming water dragon, causing it to stop suddenly. In the next moment, the water dragon started to dissipate before dispersing into the chi of the world. "Uncle Feng, help me kill him quickly." Seeing the arrival of the elderly man, the woman's face no longer had a look of terror. Instead, the lovely tone returned to her speech as she spoke angrily as if she was wronged by Jian Chen. The elderly man didn't pay attention to her. Instead, his eyes gazed at the light wind sword that was stopped by him with a small amount of astonishment. Tilting his head to look at Jian Chen, he said, "What is your name, and who is your master?" Chapter 98, another heavy loss highlight above for title. "Uncle Feng, what nonsense are you spouting at him? Help me kill him." The girl cried out behind him with a furious glare in her eyes. Already, her eyes were tearing up from the thought that Jian Chen had seen her body in its full glory. Indeed, just thinking about how she was naked in front of Jian Chen had caused her to be angry beyond belief, causing her to also feel wronged. This was the first time since she was born that she was seen by a man like this, and it was by a stranger. For the conservative lady, this type of outcome was worse than death. "Ha, young miss, although your Uncle Feng is unwilling to help out, then let your Uncle Yun come help teach this daring bully a lesson." At that moment, another voice came into the clearing as another white-robed elderly man came into view. Appearing in front of Jian Chen, he waved his fist for a brief moment before striking at Jian Chen's chest. The elder's strength was unbelievably profound. In that one fist, Jian Chen didn't doubt that it was extremely strong. Immediately dodging towards the side, Jian Chen suddenly felt a large amount of pressure on his body. The pressure was so large that it felt as if his entire body was burdened with a 1,000-pound weight, or even a mountain. Breathing was already a difficult task, his entire body felt like it was about to be crushed. Just at the moment when the pressure was at its heaviest, the azure and violet glow in his dantian began to flicker rapidly. However, while his dantian was undergoing such a state, Jian Chen himself did not notice. "Old man Yun, hold on a moment." The first elder named Uncle Feng by the lady cried out as his face changed rapidly. Unfortunately, he had spoken too late. The one named Uncle Yun looked at his fist as it struck Jian Chen's chest precisely. A mouthful of blood escaped his mouth as he felt his internal organs get damaged. The elder had smashed Jian Chen's chest hard enough to leave a dent in it. Not only did the elder break Jian Chen's bones where he was hit, but even his internal organs were just as heavily damaged. In the moment the elder had attacked Jian Chen, the weak azure and violet glow flickered as it made contact with the elder's palm before instantly disappearing. Jian Chen on the other hand was sent flying back. The elder's face changed as he gave a small start. Looking at Jian Chen fly into the air with an flabbergasted face, his eyes contained a glint of disbelief and astonishment. Jian Chen flew 30 meters into the air before crashing into the ground with a large bang. As he laid on the ground, he spat out a large mouthful of blood as he felt the pain from his ruptured organs. Already his face was as white as a sheet of paper from the lack of blood, even his face was lax. Seeing Jian Chen barely alive, the one named Uncle Yun started to blink slowly before opening his mouth to say, "Youngster, you have such a strong vitality if you can take one of my blows without dying. Fine then, today I will let you go." With that said, the one called Uncle Yun walked back towards the woman. "I hope there won't be any more disturbances," the elder behind the woman said. The one called Uncle Feng waved his hand and sent the light wind sword stuck between his fingers back towards Jian Chen. As it made contact with him, it disappeared from sight. "Young miss, let us leave now," the one named Uncle Feng said loudly as a large flying magical beast descended, landing near the three. The woman's anger wasn't completely satisfied however. Turning her head back, she said, "Uncle Feng, that person isn't dead yet. That won't do. I want him dead today." She walked towards Jian Chen with her sword ready to strike. It was clear that she did not want Jian Chen to get away with seeing her bathe. "Young miss, don't make such trouble." Uncle Feng stood in front to block the girl from moving closer to Jian Chen. "Uncle Feng," the woman argued. She had still felt wronged to the point of tearing in the eyes, almost ready to cry at any moment. "Young miss, don't be so unruly. It's getting late, so we should get going now." The elder behind her spoke flatly. With a wave of his hands, a large ball of Saint Force enveloped the lady and placed her on top of the flying magical beast. On top of the flying magical beast, the lady stamped her feet in anger at the elder who put her there. "Uncle Yun, why aren't you spoiling one air?" The two elders looked at each other in the eye with a look of helplessness. Stepping onto the flying magical beast, they immediately took off from the ground with a large gust of wind, sending them flying into the horizon. In midair, the lady stood on top of the back of the flying magical beast and glared down at the rapidly shrinking figure of Jian Chen. In her eyes was a look of anger that would never dissipate. "Uncle Feng, Uncle Yun, what is going on with you two? How could you let that scoundrel go?" She stamped her foot in angry grievance. The mist in her eyes had already become tears that threatened to fall off of her eyelashes. Hearing that, the one named Uncle Feng sighed. Judging by how wet and disorderly her hair was, he already knew what had happened to her. "Young miss, that man is quite complicated. Right now the clan is under a great deal of pressure. At this critical moment, it is best to avoid to make new enemies just in case they bring a new source of trouble to the clan," Uncle Feng said helplessly. "Uncle Feng, since when were you a coward afraid of death? That scoundrel's strength was weak. How could you think that he could be a threat to our clan?" the lady said angrily. "Young miss, that man really isn't simple. It's best not to offend anyone. Although his power is quite weak, but the person behind him is definitely strong," said the one who first struck out at Jian Chen, Uncle Yun, with a solemn but worried face. Then, he lifted his cloth-wrapped hand to show the two deep wounds on his right hand. Although the blood had stopped, the elder's right hand could still be seen as having two wounds that went from the hollow of his palm to the back of it as if a sword had cut through it. When the lady saw the injured hand of the elder, her cherry-red lips opened wide along with her eyes in disbelief. Uncle Yun. You're injured. She cried out in astonishment. The one named Uncle Feng started before saying, Old man Yun, how unexpected for you to be injured. Uncle Yun nodded his head slowly. This wound was given to me by that 20-year-old youth. How is this possible, Uncle Yun? You have to be joking. The scoundrel's strength wasn't strong at all. If he couldn't even beat me, how would he be able to harm you? She bounded forward in shock. Old man Yun, how did you get such a wound like this? Uncle Feng said with doubt. Uncle Yun could only look back at the other with a blank face. I don't know that either. When I attacked him earlier, I felt a pain in my palm and then I saw the wound. Whatever had hurt me, I don't know. Hearing this, Uncle Yun gave a gasp. This youngster really is complicated. From the moment I saw his saint weapon, I knew that it would stand out from the masses. His saint weapon wasn't like everyone else's. Whatever happened within him, it made his saint weapon even stronger. Even his strength isn't matching up with what is expected. The woman was left stunned by Uncle Yun's words. It's a good thing we didn't kill him, otherwise the ones standing behind him would be a huge bother for our clan if they stepped forward. Right now we can only hope the ones supporting him won't be too strong, or that this person had only inherited some techniques from his ancestors. By the riverside, Jian Chen laid down on the ground with blood dyeing his clothes red. The elder's fist had caused serious damage to Jian Chen, the bones in his chest were crushed, and his organs suffered extreme trauma. Right now, aside from being fully conscious, Jian Chen was powerless to move. It could be said that ever since Jian Chen was born, this was the most serious damage he had suffered. If it was not for the fact he had used a unique way to cultivate and had refined his body in ways that far outstripped others, the elder's hand would have sent him to a messy death. The light saint force from the world essence began to surge and condense towards Jian Chen. Quickly, Jian Chen was enveloped within the milky white glow and had it absorbed into every single pore of his body. With that, Jian Chen was beginning to recover at a very fast rate. Chapter 99, Returning to Wake City. The light saint force within the world essence gathered within Jian Chen and quickly began to heal him. However, Jian Chen's wounds were too serious, so even with the miraculous healing effects of the light saint force, it took a long time for Jian Chen to recover. Controlling the light saint force had taken up a lot of Jian Chen's spirit. After 4 hours, he had used up almost all of his spirit, causing him to stop. Right now, he was suffering from major blood loss as well as a dizzying headache. He was also very exhausted and desired sleep. It was almost as if he hadn't slept for 3 days and 3 nights and was almost unconscious. After healing himself for 4 hours, his inner body was healed by a little less than half his original strength. His inner organs had been treated by the light saint force, and although it wasn't completely healed, the injured parts had been regrown. All that was left was the fractured bones on his chest that were slightly more troublesome than his organs. Regarding the serious injuries on his chest, the fractured bones had already pierced into his flesh. So whenever Jian Chen moved even the tiniest bit, the wounds on his chest would make Jian Chen feel even more pain. The pain was so intense that the signals his brain was receiving were practically torturing it. Slowly reclining on the grass, he closed his eyes and slowly started to use the rest of his spirit to heal himself. However, Jian Chen had fortunately memorized the entirety of the contents of the Azulate Sword Law, the method of recuperation. With the recuperation method, he could slowly regain his spirit. Jian Chen laid there on the grass for a whole day and night. Without moving his body a single time, his eyes had remained closed for just as long. The time quickly passed by as the afternoon approached. The blazing hot rays of the sun were slowly becoming moderately warm as it left the mountains. At that moment, the stone-like Jian Chen finally opened his eyes. After a full day and night of healing, the spirit he had used up was finally replenished. Seeing the color of the sky, Jian Chen didn't hesitate for a moment and began to gather the light saint force. Rapidly, he began to heal his chest once more. As the light saint force entered his chest, pieces of the fractured bones had begun to reattach themselves and heal. For another 4 hours without stopping, Jian Chen's spirit was finally used up once more. However, after 4 hours of healing, Jian Chen's chest was finally fully recovered. However, Jian Chen's spirit wasn't recovered yet and affected his mobility, so Jian Chen sat back down on the grass cross-legged and began to use the recuperation method to recover the lost spirit. Although it wasn't too far from Wake City, but considering that the use of the Light Saint Force was far too conspicuous with its dazzling glow and that healing in Wake City was too inconvenient, no one would be able to detect the Light Saint Force except for Radiant Saint Masters. However, who would be able to guarantee that there was a Radiant Saint Master within the vicinity of Wake City? Radiant Saint Masters were rare within the Tianyuan continent, so many people would fail to find and invite one to help themselves. Jian Chen thought that if he were to reveal his ability to use Light Saint Force like Radiant Saint Masters, then he would get no small amount of glory and would never have to worry about a shortage of monster cores. However, Jian Chen didn't want to reveal that he could mimic the Radiant Saint Master's ability to use Light Saint Force because his intuition told him that if he were to keep it a secret for now, then it would definitely help him out in the future. After 3 full days of continuous healing, Jian Chen's body was finally back to full health. Upon getting up, he immediately left for the official road back to Wake City. The official road was filled with caravans escorted by groups of armed yet blood-soaked mercenaries. Although Jian Chen was a lone traveler, no one paid extra attention to him. Despite his bloody clothes from the wounds he gained, to every single mercenary within the Tianyuan continent, this was a very common sight to see. Practically every mercenary had seen these types of things every day. Walking on the roadway, Jian Chen thought back to the event from 3 days ago, especially the beautiful girl and her naked body that had appeared right in front of him. This was a sight that had left a deep effect on Jian Chen because even in his previous life, he had never had an experience like it before. 3 days ago was the first time he had ever seen the jade-like body of a woman to this extent, and this girl's body was almost as if it belonged to an immortal. However, when Jian Chen had thought about the lady's gigantic strength, his heart still couldn't quite believe it. The girl looked to be 18 years old, 20 years old at the oldest. The age difference between her and Jian Chen was almost non-existent, but to be a great saint master at this age, Jian Chen could only blush with shame at her innate talent. Soon enough, Jian Chen entered Wake City and waited for the city guards to come and inspect him. Since he had the image of an injured and bloody survivor, there was no monetary tax to enter the city. Although the guards were greedy for money, their greed was not without morals. Upon entering Wake City, Jian Chen didn't take a stroll and immediately headed towards an inn. Once he got a room, Jian Chen began to cultivate. Although it had been less than a month ago that he had broken through to become a great saint, his strength was still not strong enough to protect himself within the Tianyuan continent. Not only did the girl from 3 days ago make Jian Chen experience defeat, but she had also made him realize how much strength he needed. After paying for the room, Jian Chen stayed there within the room for 10 days. In those 10 days, Jian Chen hadn't taken a single step out of his room and only used the monster cores in his possession to cultivate. Even for meals he had the inn waitress deliver it straight to his room. After the 10 days had passed, Jian Chen's strength had made huge improvements. Already reaching the middle great saint tier, the saint force within himself was now much stronger than before. Even his saint weapon, the light wind sword, had been upgraded and became even harder than before. With 10 days of cultivation, the Class 3 monster cores Jian Chen had were all but gone, leaving Jian Chen with 2 Class 4 monster cores. Getting off the bed, Jian Chen walked towards the window to look at the sky. Because he had spent so much time cultivating, he was no longer able to distinguish what time it was, and could only rely on the positioning of the sun to get an approximate time. Right outside, the sun was shining brightly without a cloud in the sky for miles. With the huge red flaming ball in the sky emitting strong heat rays, it signified the start of the afternoon. Right now, it should be time to deal with the silver-striped golden snake. I really look forward to the 10,000 immunity. Jian Chen said as he observed the mass of people outside. Chapter 100, 10,000 immunity. 1. Jian Chen left the inn and went to the fair to buy a few dozen gourds to store water, as well as a cask large enough to fit a person in it. He also replenished his nearly exhausted supply of essentials for everyday life, as well as for living in the wilderness. Another 20 or so pairs of coarse clothing was purchased as well. After storing all of these within his space belt, Jian Chen directly left Wake City and headed toward the wilderness. Jian Chen arrived at a deserted grove and looked around. After confirming there were no people present, he removed a space ring from his space belt and retrieved the silver-striped golden snake from the ring. He then removed the dozens of gourds he had just purchased one by one and neatly placed them on the ground. Jian Chen's heart uncontrollably leapt up to his throat when he saw the arm-thick and nearly 80-meter-long silver-striped golden snake in front of him. A feeling of excitement involuntarily arose from within his heart. After staring at the silver-striped golden snake for a while, Jian Chen took a deep breath to gradually calm himself down. Afterwards, he slowly walked up to the snake, his light wind sword materializing in his hand. Pooh! Jian Chen pierced his sword straight into the snake's scarred 7-inch area. Immediately afterwards, fresh red blood gushed out. Without any hesitation, Jian Chen opened one of the gourds as fast as lightning, and placed the opening about as large as a child's fist underneath the snake's body. The gourd directly began to collect that constant flow of blood. Meanwhile, the strong, pungent smell of greasy blood filled the air, and gradually began to diffuse through the air. Smelling that continuously diffusing, strong and stinging smell of greasy blood, Jian Chen knit his brows and murmured, "This silver-striped golden snake is indeed worthy of being called a rare and unique beast. I hadn't imagined that the odor of the blood would already be so thick." Jian Chen's tone seemed to be slightly concerned. He was worried that the snake's heavy odor would bring him some kind of trouble. While Jian Chen was extremely anxious, somewhat impatient, and held much anticipation, all of the blood from the snake's body was finally collected after 2 hours. Half of the dozens of gourds that he had bought were already filled. According to Jian Chen's calculations, the total amount of blood he had collected was around 100 kilograms in weight. After carefully sealing the blood-filled gourds, Jian Chen placed them all into his space belt. Afterwards, he once again stored the snake's body into his space belt, and immediately left the area. This silver-striped golden snake's blood's odor had already been diffusing through the air for 2 hours. Although it had become quite faint, Jian Chen still wasn't certain that it wouldn't bring about any mishaps, so the sooner he left, the better. Although Jian Chen knew that perhaps he was worrying a bit too much, for the sake of minimizing danger, he was still willing to go through such inconveniences. Jian Chen returned to Wake City. After resting there for 2 days, and hearing of no special news, he once again left. This time, he didn't return to his original location. Instead, he arrived at the exact opposite location of where he had been previously. After advancing nearly 20 miles down a path, he finally found a desolate and safe area. He then once again removed the silver-striped golden snake from his belt, and began dissecting the body. Although he could have dissected the body within the city, the silver-striped golden snake was, after all, not a normal magical beast. Once its body was dissected, that strong odor of its blood would once again permeate the area. Such a unique scent of blood would definitely attract quite a few experts to investigate. With Jian Chen's current level of strength, he was still unable to go up against the many experts located in Wake City. The dissection of the body went smoothly. Although the defense of the silver-striped golden snake's outer layer of golden snake scales was extremely strong, Jian Chen's current strength had been raised by quite a lot compared to his previous level. Thus, cutting apart the snake's scales only required a small amount of strength. Jian Chen carefully removed a thumb-sized blood-red object from the snake's stomach. When he lifted it up to his eye level to examine it closer, he couldn't help but smile and murmur to himself, "So this is the silver-striped golden snake's precious snake gall." The color of the snake's gall was completely different from any other snake's. Normal snake galls had a bluish-green and black color, but this silver-striped golden snake's gall was completely crimson. It looked similar to a red gem. Jian Chen took out a small jade bottle from his space belt, and carefully placed the thumb-sized snake gall into the bottle. This snake gall was extremely important. If he wanted to refine the 10,000 immunity pill, then he'd need quite a few snake galls. This body part's importance was much more precious than the silver-striped golden snake's blood. Soon after, the silver-striped golden snake's skin had been completely removed by Jian Chen. At the same time, the snake's appearance drastically changed. It now looked like a long. The silver-striped golden snake's most precious parts were its blood and gall. Its other internal organs and its flesh were also worth considerable amounts, but they weren't very useful in Jian Chen's eyes. Afterwards, Jian Chen stored the snake's carcass back into the space ring, intending to proceed with the next steps later. After finishing up the silver-striped golden snake matter, Jian Chen looked around his surroundings. He hesitated for a bit, and looked indecisive as he seemed to stand there and contemplate for a moment. Finally, Jian Chen bit down and retrieved the large cask that he had prepared earlier, and lightly placed it on the ground. He then continued to retrieve all the blood-filled gourds, and proceed to empty them into the cask. Jian Chen now planned to refine the 10,000 immunity. This was because the silver-striped golden snake's blood had too strong of an odor, making it impossible for him to refine it in a city filled with people. Soon after, all the blood within the gourds had been poured into the large cask, the nearly 100 kilograms worth of blood filling majority of the percentile cask. Now the strong, stinging smell of blood was emitted from the cask, and circled around the air for a long time without dispersing. Such a large amount of blood collected together made the smell even more dense, and it assaulted Jian Chen's sense of smell, making him almost unable to breathe. Some special magical beast's blood was completely different from a normal magical beast's. The silver-striped golden snake was an example of this. When Jian Chen had drunk the snake's blood to detoxify himself, Jian Chen had completely ignored its extremely greasy smell since he had been completely focused on curing himself. Thus, he hadn't noticed the snake's blood had had such an intolerable heavy odor back then. Chapter 101, 10,000 Immunity, 2, Putong. Jian Chen stripped off all of his clothes, and jumped straight into the blood-filled cask. At the same time, he retrieved the snake gall from within the jade bottle, and directly swallowed it. Not long after the gall entered his stomach, Jian Chen immediately felt a surge of activity from his 5 senses within his body. His stomach began to grumble loudly against his will, as if he was currently having diarrhea. Jian Chen sat cross-legged within the cask. The blood in the cask submerged everything up to his neck, leaving only his head exposed outside. Feeling the ice-cold air emitted from the blood, Jian Chen gradually relaxed. He closed his eyes, and began to absorb the unique genes from within the blood, following the procedure he had read in books. It was because of the existence of these unique elements within the silver-striped golden snake's blood that gave the blood its ability to detoxify poison. According to the books, one must absorb all of these unique elements within the body, and then fuse them into their own blood in order to gain an unpoisonable body. The blood would support the body, and grant one's flesh an overpowering ability to resist poisons. The ability was so powerful that one could even become completely immune to poisons. Once the silver-striped golden snake's blood was used to refine the 10,000 immunity, one would be entirely immune to any poisons weaker than the silver-striped golden snake's. One would even gain the effect of being able to strongly resist poisons at the same level as the silver-striped golden snakes, although one cannot be immune to it. Thus, the amount of danger the poison would be able to inflict would be drastically decreased, or the spread of the poison would be greatly deterred. Although the 10,000 immunity wasn't immune to all the poisons that existed, it was enough to make Jian Chen excited. After all, the silver-striped golden snake's poison had widespread fame on the Tianyuan continent. There were just a handful of poisons more potent than the silver-striped golden snake's. Moreover, such poisons were extremely uncommon, and were as rare to see as the silver-striped golden snake itself. Jian Chen sat cross-legged in the cask with his eyes tightly shut. His stomach continued to loudly grumble extremely loudly. If anyone was standing next to Jian Chen, they would be able to clearly hear the sound. Within Jian Chen's stomach was something similar to a roaring sea. It was very stormy. At the same time, an extremely nauseating feeling arose from Jian Chen's heart, and Jian Chen could barely stop himself from vomiting. I guess the snake's gall bladder is being dissolved, the bile inside is leaking out. Jian Chen resisted the nausea with great difficulty. He inwardly recalled that the books had stated if one wanted to refine the 10,000 immunity, aside from blood, the most important part was the gall bladder. Both the gall bladder and the blood were essential components, because the blood's poison-resistant special elements could only be absorbed into one's body by being drawn in by the gall bladder. These poison-resistant elements weren't like world essence that could be absorbed whenever one wanted to. If one didn't have the appropriate object to draw them in, then even if one had the blood, they wouldn't be able to absorb the elements. Although directly drinking the fresh blood could also detoxify the poison, this could only temporarily address the issue. Not long after, a simple trip to the toilet would drain the consumed blood. There was no way one could even think the way to obtaining an unpoisonable body would be like that. At that moment, a warm current suddenly appeared in Jian Chen's abdomen. The warmth continued to increase, and in that instant, Jian Chen felt like his abdomen was burning, as if a fire was blazing within it. Along with this abrupt uprising of changes within his abdomen, Jian Chen's pores all opened, as if linked together. At the same time, inside of the cask, traces of that bizarre and special energy began to materialize like small fish within the crimson blood. They all began to gradually swim toward Jian Chen and enter his body through his pores. Just as this energy was entering his body, Jian Chen's originally serene expression suddenly changed. The bizarre energy entering him instantly changed from being docile like a small sheep into a ferocious group of tigers. They wildly revolted within Jian Chen's body, making his entire body suffer from intense pain. This is bad. There are unexpectedly some magical beasts' unique berserk elements within this blood. Moreover, it's even stronger than those within a monster core. Sensing his body's changes, Jian Chen instantly understood what was happening. All magical beasts' energies contained berserk elements. This was something that everyone in Tian Yuan continent has known for ages. However, these berserk elements were almost all hidden within monster cores, so Jian Chen hadn't expected that they would also exist in the silver-striped golden snake's blood. Moreover, these berserk elements were much more powerful than the ones that he had absorbed from monster cores during cultivation, perhaps even 100-fold stronger. Resisting the powerful pain arising from his body with much difficulty, an extremely baffled thought popped up in Jian Chen's mind. How come I hadn't felt these berserk elements at all when I first drank the silver-striped golden snake's blood? Jian Chen sat in the cask, his body beginning to shake as his entire body down to even his pores were in intense pain, and the muscles on Jian Chen's couldn't help but twitch. His originally flushed face had gradually begun to turn pale. The traces of the bizarre and special energy within the snake's blood seemed to be attracted by something, and continuously rushed into Jian Chen's pores. As the amount of energy in his body continued to increase, the berserk elements contained within also increased, and became more and more powerful. The pain brought forth onto his body by these berserk elements made Jian Chen sweat profusely. However, he clenched his teeth and fists tightly, and continued to resist it. At that moment, the azure and violet glows in Jian Chen's dantian suddenly emitted faint light rays. Meanwhile, the fierce pain Jian Chen was feeling suddenly disappeared without a trace. The berserk elements absorbed by him that had accompanied the bizarre energy within the blood seemed to have been attracted by some strange force. As soon as they entered Jian Chen's body, they immediately began to fly towards the azure and violet glows in his dantian. For a while, Jian Chen was a bit at loss at the sudden changes. However, he soon realized what had happened, and immediately sighed in relief. He knew that every time he absorbed energy from monster cores, the berserk elements contained would also be ingested by the azure and violet glows in his dantian. Therefore, there was nothing strange about what had just happened. Without the torment of the berserk elements, Jian Chen's previously pained expression immediately loosened. However, he still didn't relax from this, and immediately surveyed the current situation his inner body was in. The only thing he could sense was the special elements. The berserk elements within the snake's blood had been completely absorbed by the azure and violet glows in his dantian upon entering his body. There were only some harmless special elements remaining, and they were gradually gathering in the direction of where the snake's gallbladder was. Eventually, they completely surrounded the gallbladder. The absorption of these special elements was extremely slow. Jian Qin stayed in the cask for an entire day and night before he was finally able to finish absorbing all of the special elements in the blood. Currently, the snake's gallbladder in Jian Chen's stomach had already gathered all of the special elements, and formed a thick layer. After a day and night of absorbing all of the elements within the blood in the cask not only lost all of its color and luster, even the intolerable smell of it had disappeared without a trace. Right now, there was only one step remaining until Jian Chen could refine the 10,000 immunity. This step was also the most important one. Whether or not he would be successful completely depended on this step. Chapter 102, 10,000 Immunity, 3. Right now, there was only one step remaining until Jian Chen could refine the 10,000 immunity. This step was also the most important one. Whether or not he would be successful completely depended on this step. By this point all of the most important parts of the silver-striped golden snake's blood had been cleanly gathered by Jian Chen and concentrated in the gallbladder to form a strange substance. The strange substance was the antivenom and the blood of the silver-striped golden snake combined together. In accordance to the contents of the books, Jian Chen needed to absorb the antivenom and blood substance into his own body. And once he had completely assimilated it into his body, only then would he successfully gain the 10,000 immunity. As long as the substance was absorbed into the body, then Jian Chen's blood would take on a detoxifying property. Not only that, but the body would undergo changes as the blood circulated around the body. After some time, the body would become resistant to poison and grow an immunity to weaker poisons without fear of harm. With a heavy expression, Jian Chen stood up. This was the final step as well as the most crucial one because the antivenom substance would only gather within his body if the gallbladder of the snake was present. If there was no gallbladder, then the substance would dissipate uselessly. Before he could digest the snake's gallbladder, he would need to assimilate the antivenom within his bloodstream. Jian Chen calmed himself down and began to control the substance around his body. However, as the substance left the gallbladder, a strange attraction started to happen and began to pull at the substance Jian Chen was trying to control. Jian Chen bit his lips as he increased the amount of focus he was putting in his control. Although Jian Chen's strength was still quite weak, his spirit was unquestionably strong. Under his increased control, the strange substance had finally left the gallbladder and assimilated into his bloodstream. However, just as he was assimilating the bloodstream, the strange substance completely separated from the blood, like two opposite poles of a magnet. The two seemed incompatible with each other, and there was no way they could possibly fuse. However, Jian Chen still wasn't discouraged. He once again focused his strength on controlling the strange substance to forcefully merge with the bloodstream. He then watched it from the side. If the strange substance showed the slightest indication of separating again, he would immediately pour all his focus onto it and force it back into the bloodstream. As the blood flowed throughout his veins, the substance which Jian Chen had forcefully absorbed into his blood was finally completely assimilated. Surprisingly, a part of the substance had a green tint to its color, but in the end that had also been absorbed into the blood and disappeared. As the energy from the substance was absorbed into his bloodstream, Jian Chen felt that his blood had somehow gotten weaker, as if something else had happened. After a portion of the energy from the substance was assimilated, Jian Chen didn't know how much time had passed, but the gallbladder he had digested had shrunk a bit. Jian Chen knew that the gallbladder wouldn't be able to survive in his body for long. So without a moment of hesitation, Jian Chen had forcefully broken a part of the substance away and began to try to assimilate it into his bloodstream one more time. Time after time, Jian Chen had tried again for an unknown amount of time. But in the end, the very last of the substance had successfully been assimilated into his bloodstream as the gall bladder was on the brink of disappearing. Feeling the noticeable change in his bloodstream, Jian Chen let out a sigh of relief. His heart grew excited as a bright smile took over his face. The 10,000 immunity, I never thought I would gain the unpoisonable body. Jian Chen said inwardly. From his past 20 years of experience, he knew that this new world he was in was even more dangerous, so the 10,000 immunity would bring him a great amount of benefits. At the very least, if he was to be captured by his enemies, he wouldn't have to worry about poisoned food. However, while Jian Chen had successfully refined the 10,000 immunity, it was still in its primary stage and not its perfect stage. While his blood had fused with the antivenom from the blood of the silver-striped golden snake, this fusion was not yet complete and would need some time before it would reach perfection. Once his blood and the antivenom had perfectly fused together, it would then circulate around his body endlessly and transform the bones, flesh and organs within his body. Every part of his body would gain the antivenom capability. This would be the true extent of the 10,000 immunity. Slowly, Jian Chen opened his eyes to the first rays of light. In the horizons, the fiery sun was just peeking out, meaning that it was only the start of the morning. Jian Chen leapt out from the blood-filled cask and took out a towel from his space belt to clean off the blood on him before wearing a new set of clothes. After all that time Jian Chen had spent in the cask, the blood within had already been reduced by a quarter. Even the previously bloody smell had dissipated and the color of the blood had started to darken a bit. Looking at the cask beside him, Jian Chen kicked at the container firmly. The cask overturned and broke on the hard ground, spilling the blood onto the ground. While the blood of the silver-striped golden snake was incomparably precious, the most important part of the blood had already been absorbed by him. The remaining parts of the blood could only be said to be equal to water and did not have a single use for it anymore. After returning to Wake City once more, Jian Chen entered a restaurant and ordered a few dishes to eat his fill. After a day and night of not eating, Jian Chen's stomach was a bit hungry. Right now was the busiest time for the restaurant, the environment inside was already very lively. The people coming and going was like an endless stream and filled up the tables in a flash. Even the waitresses of the restaurant were constantly scampering around busily taking orders and delivering dishes. Little brother, the seats here are all occupied already. Could I possibly sit here with you? Chapter 103, Flame Mercenaries. Highlight above for title, Little brother, the seats here are all occupied already. Could I possibly sit here with you? At that moment, a deep-sounding voice came from behind Jian Chen. Turning his head to look at the source, Jian Chen saw a middle-aged man with a big smile on his face. He stood across on the opposite side of Jian Chen and stared at him with a good-natured look. The middle-aged man looked to be around 40 years old and wore a cyan-colored robe. However, to Jian Chen's sharp eyes, this robe was made of coarse material and so was categorized as a cheap cloth. With his short black hair, there was nothing about him that stood out. Even his good-natured smile wasn't a fake one. Jian Chen nodded his head with a smile. Since the restaurant has suddenly filled up, I can't possibly use up all this room by myself, come and sit with me. Then, many thanks little brother. The other man laughed as he cupped his hands together. Then he pulled out the stool and sat down on it. Miss, a cup of wine and a pound of your finest horse meat. The man called out. Okay, please wait a moment, honored customer. The waitress called back. Jian Chen stared at the middle-aged man in front of him for a while before finally tearing his eyes off of him and looking back at his own meal. The middle-aged man looked at Jian Chen and chuckled, and what should I call this younger brother? Jian Chen. He responded with a mouthful of meat, so the words did not come out as audibly. Jian Chen, ha, what a pleasant name. The middle-aged man sized up Jian Chen with his eyes and then opened his mouth to ask, Brother Jian Chen, I'm assuming you are a mercenary as well. He nodded his head, correct, but because my strength is quite low, I am only one of the lowest of D-ranked mercenaries. A mercenary's rank corresponded with their strength and their merits from missions done. The lowest of the D-ranked mercenaries were generally newbie saints. However, there were a few cultivators that did not yet condense their saint weapons amongst the D-ranked mercenaries. Even though the middle-aged man looked to be quite well-natured, Jian Qin didn't dare to reveal his precise strength to him. The man laughed with no ill intentions. "Little brother, you can't be any older than 20 years old. Once you've successfully condensed your saint force into a saint weapon, then your potential will be unlimited." The man's words were sincere, but after he spoke, he gave a long sigh. Thinking back, I was 25 years old when I first condensed my saint weapon and broke through to become a saint. To think little brother here is only 20 years old and is a saint. I don't think it'll be too far off until there will be another gifted Earth Saint Master in the future. When the 3 words Earth Saint Master were said, the man's face had looked almost expectant. Hearing that, Jian Qin couldn't help but look at the middle-aged man once more. While he had a better impression of this man, it was still nothing more than just that. Condensing a saint weapon at the age of 25 could be said to be quite mediocre within the Tianyuan continent. This type of person would be limited to being a great saint master at the best, and without coming across an opportunity, they would never be able to break through to become an Earth Saint Master. After all, in the space between a great saint master and an Earth Saint Master was an unbelievably difficult threshold. This threshold is so difficult that condensing a saint weapon was easier by 100,000 times. This is because from the breakthrough to an Earth Saint Master from a Great Saint Master, if one was not careful, they would fall in a land without redemption. In a less severe case, they would suffer a serious injury and lose their entire cultivation, thus becoming a cripple. In the worst-case scenario, they would forfeit their lives to the Yellow Springs. TL note, https://en. Wikipedia. org/wiki/du. The Chinese version of hell, equivalent to Yomi of Japanese mythology. The threshold separating the Earth Saint Master from the Great Saint Master was one dividing life from death. There were many people with mediocre talent that reached the Great Saint Master but were unable to break through to become an Earth Saint Master. Many more had even died trying to make the breakthrough. The success rate of breaking through to become an Earth Saint Master was only 1%. Regarding this bit of information, Jian Qin had known about it. Whether or not it was in the Kargath Library or the Changyang Mansion Library, Jian Qin had read about it. "Little brother, I am guessing you haven't joined a mercenary group yet?" The middle-aged man asked Jian Qin with a small smile. Hearing this, Jian Qin's heart jumped as he realized what the man was about to say, but he nodded his head in response. "That is correct. Little brother, why don't you join my flame mercenaries? Although the amount of people within our group isn't large, the mercenaries in here are quite good-natured," he said eagerly. Jian Qin became silent as he listened to the man. He had never thought about joining a mercenary group before, since in his mind, joining a mercenary group was only a burden that would limit his free-roaming spirit. It would also bring his cultivation rate to a standstill since the only way he could cultivate rapidly was to use monster cores. Monster cores were absolutely necessary, and so the amount needed was also enormous. If he were to go into the magical beast mountain range by himself, the profits he earned would naturally be his and keep up with his consumption rate. However, if he were to join the mercenary group, it would be easier to kill magical beasts at the cost of splitting up the amount of monster cores with the entire group, which would be a problem. If Jian Qin were to join a mercenary group, he needed to go solo. Otherwise, the monster core distribution would be given to other people as well. Seeing Jian Qin's silence, the middle-aged man didn't give up. "Brother Jian Qin, my flame mercenaries is only a small-sized group that doesn't restrict the actions of anyone like they do in the larger groups. With so many different types of rules and restrictions that makes one's head want to explode, our group is not like that. Joining my mercenary group is merely helping the group have an easier way to earn money. You must know that the magical beast mountain range is a profitable way of earning money and that monster cores sell for a high price while helping us cultivate our saint force, which is extremely essential. Even the parts of a magical beast can be sold for a high price to any of the restaurants. As our numbers increase, then so does our strength. Even if we come across a high-leveled magical beast, we would be able to kill it. Just think. If we are able to kill a high-leveled magical beast, imagine how large our profits would be. Even your heart would consider this, I bet. The man stopped momentarily to breath before continuing. If you are by yourself, even if you can deal with a few low-leveled magical beasts, then it would not sell for much money, I'm sure. Even if you spend so much energy killing it, the amount of money earned would not even cover your healing costs. And if you come across an ambush from a few high-leveled magical beasts, how long do you think a single person could run away from a dozen high-leveled magical beasts? This is definitely impossible, and in the end, that person would only be throwing his life away. Seeing how Jian Chen was still silent, the man gave it another try. Brother Jian Chen, if it's concerning the matter of distribution of benefits, you don't have to worry. While our flame mercenaries was recently established a few years ago, the brothers within the group are made of steel who care for the bonds of friendship over the metal of money. In the case that our group has a profit, then no matter if you worked hard or not, the group will not treat you unfairly. Chapter 104, Joining a Mercenary Group. Highlight above for title. Seeing how Jian Chen was still silent, the man gave it another try. Brother Jian Chen, if it's concerning the matter of distribution of benefits, you don't have to worry. While our flame mercenaries was recently established a few years ago, the brothers within the group are made of steel who care for the bonds of friendship over the metal of money. In the case that our group has a profit, then no matter if you worked hard or not, the group will not treat you unfairly. With that said, the middle-aged man had stopped talking. He had said all that needed to be. The only thing left was to see what choice Jian Chen would make. Jian Chen's eyebrows furrowed in thought as he considered the benefits within his head. Finally biting his lip, his eyes shone with a firm decision. All right then, I'll join your group. However, I have some conditions. I will not have any type of restriction put onto me, neither will I have to obey anyone. Also, if I want to leave the group in the future, the group will not try to stop me in any way. The middle-aged man looked at Jian Chen with doubt. Brother Jian Chen, could it be you're not going to even ask about how strong the flame mercenaries are or if there are any strong enemies? You have to realize, if our flame mercenaries have a strong enemy and you join, then it will definitely bring you trouble as well and may very well be a concern to your life. Jian Chen laughed gently as he said, if things like this were too frightening, then why did I bother to leave my home to explore the world? If I have decided to join your mercenary group, then a factor like this was not even in my range of thinking. The middle-aged man began to laugh without restraint. Good, good, good. Brother Jian Chen, I really can't take your age seriously. You're quite the brave person. The conditions you asked for won't be of any problem since our group is a small one whose only goal is to earn money. The mercenaries in our group won't try to restrict you either. If you want to leave the group, you're free to do so at any time. This couldn't be any better. Jian Chen nodded his head. The middle-aged man nodded as well. We've talked for quite some time and I didn't even introduce myself yet. My name is Kendall, captain of the Flame Mercenaries. Brother Jian Chen, if you don't mind, then call me Uncle Kendall. Whatever titles people give to the captains, I care not for it. Kendall laughed. All right, then in the future I'll call you Uncle Kendall. In Jian Chen's eyes, Kendall was someone he had a good impression of, and seemed to be quite honest and dependable now. Soon after, Kendall and Jian Chen both finished their food and left the restaurant together to go to the mercenary union to take care of the formality procedure. Joining a mercenary group was relatively simple. So in a flash, Jian Chen had taken care of the entire procedure and became an official member of the Flame Mercenaries. Jian Chen, let's go. I'll take you to the temporary meeting spot and introduce you to the other members. Kendall began to walk on the road as they both left the mercenary union. On the way, Kendall began to explain a few things about the Flame Mercenaries, allowing Jian Chen to gain a better understanding. The Flame Mercenaries were established 5 years ago as a small mercenary group. Soon after they were established, the members had spent the majority of their time in the magical beast forest killing magical beasts for money. Very rarely did they accomplish any missions, so for that reason, they remained to be a D-ranked group without having a single chance to prove their strength. Including Kendall, there were 9 other members within the group, so including Jian Chen, the Flame Mercenaries now had 10 members in total. According to Kendall, in those 8 members, aside from himself being at the primary Saint Master stage, 5 members were at the Great Saint stage while the remaining 3 were only at the Saint level. After he said that, Kendall slapped his forehead as he turned to Jian Chen with a smile. "Ah, that's right, brother Jian Chen, I still don't know what type of strength you possess right now." Although Kendall's heart could only guess that Jian Chen was only at the Saint level due to his young age, but this was only a guess. Until he got a straight answer from Jian Chen, he didn't dare to make a rash conclusion. With a small chuckle, Jian Chen took out the badge representing him as a mercenary from his space belt. This mercenary badge was given to Jian Chen when he first became one, proving that he was a D-ranked mercenary. Seeing the badge, Kendall's face didn't change at all. "Then our flame mercenaries have just added another saint to our ranks. With this increase in strength, hunting magical beasts will be that much easier." Jian Chen walked with Kendall for about the time it took for an oil lamp to burn out before finally arriving at an ordinary-looking house with broken cobblestone steps leading to it. The house was not very big, and the eaves of the house had plenty of cobwebs hanging about it. Even the walls had many scars from the passage of time and nature. It was clear to see that this house had been in existence in Wake City for many years, but no one had taken care of it. Kendall walked up to the door of the house and lightly knocked on it. Not too long after, the wooden door opened slightly to reveal the dark-skinned head of a person. Judging from his skinny face, the youth looked to be around 26 years old and looked like the type of person to be a snatcher if put within a group of people. Upon seeing Kendall, the youth's face revealed a smile as he said, "Ah, Uncle Kendall, I just knew it was you." Soon after, Jian Chen followed Kendall into the room. While the light within the house was dusky, it did not affect Jian Chen's vision at all. As Jian Chen looked around the house, he began to take in the sight in its entirety. The house from the inside wasn't too big, and the layout wasn't complicated at all. Aside from a few plank beds, there was a single long table along with a few stools. In fact, the room's layout could even be said to be quite crude. On top of the plank beds were a few bored people lazing about with a bottle of wine in their hands. However, when Captain Kendall entered the room, everyone immediately stared at him and started to gather around him. "Gather around everyone, let me introduce you all to Brother Jian Chen. He has just recently joined our Flame Mercenaries, and is the youngest out of all the people in our group. Starting today, I hope everyone can take care of him." As soon as he entered the room, Kendall had pulled Jian Chen along to introduce him. At this, Jian Chen knew he had to say something. Standing with his feet together and cupping his hands in a salute towards everyone, he smiled. "I am a newcomer here, I hope that everyone will help keep an eye on me." You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.